Chapter 1365. This trip took him another few decades. Lin Yu had set off from the southwest side of the Emperor's city, and it took him another 50 years. Within the vast origin ground, there was no end in sight. Even though Lin Yu was at the Dao induction state and had grasped the space-time Dao laws, he was still unable to see the end of the origin ground at full speed. At this moment, Lin Yu looked at the vast land and could not help but have a guess in his heart. Back then, this origin ground was only a small part of the Luoda territory, and the place they were at was in the wilderness. Outside of the universe and the origin ground, are there any other strong living beings? This was Lin Yu's guess. But now, Lin Yu was just guessing. At this moment, Lin Yu had entered a secret ground through the token left behind by the utmost being of the star realm. This place was different from the wilderness of the origin ground, and there were plants growing here, birds chirping and flowers fragrant. There were even animals and plants that Lin Yu had never seen before. These living beings were extremely strong, and every single one of them had the strength of an ancestor state at the very least. Within the endless mountains, one could see terrifying shock waves surging out from time to time. There were also terrifying living beings that were engaged in great battles. Even the void was trembling. Some of the living beings were fighting over the mountain treasures that had appeared, and one could see endless blood rain falling from the distance. A gigantic ape with wings stood tall and upright, uprooting the entire mountain range and smashing a gigantic python into two before devouring it. Fresh blood dripped down, looking extremely menacing. This place seemed to still be in the era of wilderness. There were all sorts of strange living beings that possessed terrifying abilities. At this moment, the handkerchief in Lin Yu's hand was already floating in the air, guiding the way for Lin Yu. This place was restricted by the laws, and it was difficult to soar into the air. Furthermore, Lin Yu was here to pay respects to an old friend of the utmost being of the star realm. As a sign of respect, he did not choose to fly. Walking within the 100,000 mountains, he felt the aura of the wilderness of this place. This place was not man-made, but formed under the nourishment of the heaven and earth. Lin Yu couldn't help but guess. Was it the same in the land of origin back then? Was it because of the Great War that caused the extinction of all life? However, this was something that only existed before ancient history. Lin Li had no idea. This was because when he followed Lin Xian to the origin grounds, this place was already in ruins. Not long after, Lin Yu crossed many mountains. They arrived at the place where several powerful beasts were fighting. The ancient trees and the ground here were all emitting a foul stench of blood. There were even broken limbs. They were all left behind by the great battle between the exotic beasts. It had a body that was even larger than a mountain range. Symbols interweaved on its body, making it look extremely primitive. It was a rune that Lin Yu had never seen before. However, there was a sense of familiarity in his heart. It seemed to have a special connection with the three styles of the ancient god. Roar. The giant ape's wings had already been torn apart. His body had already shrunk. He was recovering his injuries on the mountain of corpses and the sea of blood. At this moment, he sensed the arrival of other creatures. He roared and directly attacked Lin Yu. This creature was undoubtedly powerful. However, there were no traces of Dao on his body. On the contrary, there were mysterious runes on his body that made his body extremely strong. The creatures here didn't have the ability to cultivate. However, with the help of the runes on their bodies were extremely strong. The giant ape was the overlord of this area. Right now, in the midst of the massacre, Lin Fan had obtained victory with great difficulty and killed off all the other powerful beings present. However, he was also heavily injured. The giant ape flapped his wings, and the runes on his body shone. Lin Yu stood calmly in place. Even at his peak, the giant ape wasn't Lin Yu's match. Moreover now, the giant ape was already heavily injured and had less than 1/10 of his strength left. Lin Yu struck out with his palm. Bang! The giant ape was directly pushed back, and dense cracks appeared on his body. Lin Yu couldn't help but be slightly surprised. His cultivation had been advancing, but the strength of his combat body had never fallen behind. However, with 50% of his strength, the giant ape wasn't directly beaten into a bloody mist. Only cracks appeared on his body. This not only aroused Lin Yu's interest, but he said, after paying respects to the supreme old friend of the Star Realm, I can explore this land. The giant ape didn't seem to have high intelligence. The runes on his body shone and instantly healed the cracks on his body. Then, he attacked Lin Yu again. However, he wasn't so lucky this time. The giant ape was directly blown up by Lin Yu. Broken bones and blood splattered in all directions. Lin Yu took an object from the giant ape's hand and held it in his hand. This was a bone of an unknown creature. It was densely covered in runes and was very profound. Even though he was holding it in his hand, it gave off a powerful feeling. This seemed to be one of the ways that exotic beasts could advance. They could use the runes on it to strengthen themselves. Several powerful exotic beasts in this area had lost their lives because of this bone. However, it was now in Lin Yu's hands. Lin Yu wasn't in a hurry to comprehend the principles within. This bone could be left for later. Lin Yu crossed a few more mountain ranges and finally saw a gray-tiled hut under a waterfall on a cliff. The aura of time emanated from it. Lin Yu came to the side of the hut. There was a lone grave here, but there was no tombstone. The handkerchief began to slowly dissipate here, turning into ashes and adhering to the grave. At this moment, a figure of unparalleled beauty appeared. She still had her own consciousness. At this moment, she looked at Lin Yu and said, "You can't come here after all." This was just a weak strand of divine will. She seemed to have been waiting for the supreme of the Star Realm, so she left a trace of her consciousness on the grave. There was an obvious sadness in the eyes of the illusory figure. It was the supreme of the Star Realm who entrusted me to come here. Lin Yu stood before the grave and said calmly, "In order to await the arrival of the supreme of the Star Realm, this woman of unparalleled beauty was left with only a remnant consciousness." Lin Yu did not know what had happened in between. Has he already joined the mysterious race? The remnant consciousness asked. Yes. Lin Yu nodded his head. However, the supreme of the Star Realm did not betray us. He has his own plans. Lin Yu said. He did not tell her that the supreme of the Star Realm had already been corroded by the mysterious matter and did not have much time left. I know everything. Chun has been unhindered since the ancient times and is so attached to the universe. How could he betray us? He was just lying to me in the past. At this moment, tears were flowing down the eyes of the unparalleled beauty. Back then, the supreme of the Star Realm had given up on everything. Old friends, lovers, all of them had joined the mysterious race. Even for this woman of unparalleled beauty, the supreme of the Star Realm had concealed the truth. He is a senior that is worthy of respect. Lin Yu said, since he is no longer coming back, I have nothing to worry about. The unparalleled beauty said slowly. The reason why her remnant consciousness had always existed here was to wait for the supreme of the Star Realm so that she could see him one last time. But right now, everything was impossible. Thank you. The woman looked at Lin Yu. After thanking him, the remnant consciousness dissipated gradually. Lin Yu bowed slightly and stood there for 3 days straight. After paying his respects, he turned around and left. Chapter 1366. Lin Yu turned around and left the place. At the same time, he lamented in his heart. If he reached such a level one day, would he be able to protect his women and friends? Regarding all of this, Lin Yu had a thought in his mind. He absolutely would not allow this to happen because he had already promised them that after the chaos was quelled, he would bring them along to spend the rest of their lives together. After walking out of the place, Lin Yu calmed himself down. Then, he came to the place where the giant ape died. The smell of blood had not dissipated yet. When Lin Yu arrived, the smell hit him in the face. The place was like a scene of carnage. Countless ferocious beasts were devouring the corpses of the overlords. As they continued to devour, their bodies began to mutate, and they were gradually becoming stronger. When they saw Lin Yu coming, they were all shocked. They roared, as if warning Lin Yu to leave quickly. However, This kind of threat had no effect on Lin Yu. Lin Yu came to the corpse of the giant ape at a leisurely pace. Under the devouring of these exotic beasts, the remaining pieces of the giant ape had already been nibbled away. Only a few pieces of bloody remains remained. Under Lin Yu's gaze, the beasts that were about to attack Lin Yu exploded into a bloody mist and dissipated. After smelling the fresh smell of blood, the beasts here seemed to be unable to sense the pressure emitted by Lin Yu and directly pounced on him. There were leopard heads, snake tails, lions covered in scales. All kinds of beasts attacked Lin Yu. Under the indiscriminate attack of silence, the beasts here roared and turned into dust. Their existence was completely wiped out, and they no longer existed. The place returned to silence. Lin Yu walked to the corpses of the overlords who had been devoured and obtained a few bones with runes engraved on them. After careful observation, the runes in the bodies of these overlords were clearly much simpler than the runes on the bone he'd obtained. However, it still had research value. That was because the runes seemed to be able to strengthen his body. It was a body-tempering technique. Lin Yu wasn't a creature from this place, so it was difficult for him to completely control it. However, it was only a matter of time. After that, Lin Yu transformed into a god of slaughter and wandered around this world, constantly killing strange beasts and collecting the runic bones that were engraved in their blood and bones. As time passed, Lin Yu had been here for nearly 100 years. As they ventured deeper into the forest, the exotic beasts grew stronger and stronger. In fact, some mutated beasts could even pose a threat to Lin Yu. Lin Yu wasn't in a hurry to kill creatures of this level. After 100 years of meditation, he had begun to grasp the power of this rune. He discovered that the runes could devour each other and become more powerful. Lin Yu had already refined the runes he'd obtained at the beginning into his body. There were traces of the runes even in his blood. Red light emerged from his body with an intimidating aura. It was the killing light that had automatically condensed after killing countless creatures. However, Lin Yu didn't care at all as he wandered around this world. He didn't use the power of his cultivation at the moment. Instead, he was using the power of the runes to enhance his body to fight these creatures. 100 years of time would be of great benefit to him. He was constantly familiarizing himself with the runes. Lin Yu also realized how powerful the runes were. They could enhance his body endlessly. If he devoured more runes, Lin Yu had a feeling that his body might surpass his cultivation and become his greatest reliance. Lin Yu cultivated the 3-in-1 realm. After reaching his current level, as long as he advanced in one realm, he could passively enhance the other two aspects. This was also the reason why Lin Yu needed several times more energy than ordinary people every time he broke through a realm. There were endless fortunes in the land of origin now, and this was the fortune that Lin Yu knew. He wouldn't give it up easily. He had roughly determined the location of several powerful beasts in the depths of this place. They almost had the strength of a half-step supreme. If Lin Yu only used the power of his body, it would undoubtedly be extremely difficult to kill these beasts. However, he wasn't in a hurry. He wandered around this world, constantly looking for beasts that were evenly matched with him. After a great battle, he would devour the rune's power in its body after killing it. There were true bones and true blood. Although Lin Yu would still leave them after devouring them, there were still hazy runes on them. They could be used as inheritances for others to comprehend. This seemed to be similar to the bloodline inheritance of the strange king race, which was also the innate divine skill. That was because the power of these runes could be passed down through the bloodline. In fact, among the beasts that Lin Yu killed, Lin Yu discovered that some of the beast descendants had mutated runes on them. They were beasts with ordinary bloodlines. However, the runes on their descendants were incomparably complicated and had boundless potential. For these rare beasts, Lin Yu kept them into his inner world. Although the beasts here were all bloodthirsty and cruel, they were still very much alive. After staying in Lin Yu for so long, he discovered that the mutated beast's offspring were clearly much more intelligent and easier to tame. These could be used as the foundation of the imperial city. After bringing them back and training them properly, they could become the saint beasts that guarded the imperial city. However, the chances of such mutations were extremely low. Among the close to 10,000 beasts that Lin Yu had killed, there were only 5 or 6 of them. However, each and every one of them had the potential to become an overlord in the depths of this world. In other words, they could grow into half-step utmost beings. All of these beasts were kept within Lin Yu's inner world and reared. After bringing them back to the imperial city, he would tame them properly. After Lin Yu smashed the head of one of the beasts, fresh blood flowed all over the ground. Opening up the skull, he saw the mysterious power of runes carved on it. Closing his eyes, Lin Yu absorbed the runes. He then looked into the distance. There was a mountain peak that pierced through the clouds. This was a gigantic dragon that was covered in black scales. It was even larger than ordinary stars. Beneath its body, this mountain peak that pierced through the clouds was nothing more than a slightly bigger tree. Half of its body was within the clouds. Its tail was propped up on the ground like a boundless mountain range. This was definitely one of the strongest, ferocious beasts in this world. In fact, Lin Yu could sense that this ferocious beast was even stronger than a true half-step to utmost being. That was because its physical body state was way too horrifying. With every twist and turn, it could cause mountains and rivers to collapse. Even the void was regenerating after collapsing continuously. Within a radius of 10,000 miles around that dragon, not a single blade of grass could be found. There was some sort of poison on its body that was destroying the plants and vegetation around it. However, this dragon seemed to be nearing the end of its lifespan. At this moment, it was roaring endlessly, intimidating all the other beasts so that none of them dared to approach it. I'll start with you then. Lin Yu looked at that dragon indifferently. At this moment, the runes within his body had already turned extremely strong. They were complex and unfathomable, as though they were nurturing some sort of horrifying power. As Lin Yu took a step forward, the void around him began to crack apart inch by inch. And this was because this place was protected by a special set of Tao laws. If this were in the outside world, who knew what sort of phenomenon this would cause? Chapter 1367. Lin Yu directly invaded the dragon's territory. Black scales were falling off everywhere, and there were pools of sticky water with a foul stench that could corrode the flesh of living creatures. Weak exotic beasts couldn't enter this area at all. After Lin Yu passed through the area filled with white bones, the dragon's tail wriggled. Lin Yu could clearly sense that the dragon was nearing the end of its lifespan. Otherwise, Lin Yu wouldn't be able to withstand the pressure here without using the king's token or anything else. Exotic beasts of this level weren't much less intelligent than ordinary ones. Therefore, Lin Yu retracted his aura and lay dormant here, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Lin Yu wasn't the only one who had designs on the dragon. There were other overlords of the area as well. Some lay dormant in the clouds, while others were at the periphery of the territory. At this moment, they were all gathering around here. The atmosphere became extremely oppressive. Lin Yu hid in a huge skeleton. A terrifying battle was about to take place here. Lin Yu didn't want to use the power of his cultivation right now. The runes in his body were still in the process of transformation. He sealed his cultivation on his own accord, wanting the runes to complete the final transformation and completely master this power. A month passed just like that. The exotic beasts lying dormant here seemed to have been waiting all along. They were afraid that the dragon still had some tricks up its sleeve. As time continued to pass, the atmosphere here became more and more oppressive. Roar. The huge dragon's roar scattered the clouds for thousands of miles. At this moment, the dragon's true form was revealed. There was a pair of fleshy wings on its huge black body. However, it was now hanging limply to the side. The dragon's bell-like, diamond-shaped eyes looked in all directions, and a terrifying pressure spread out. He already knew that there were other exotic beasts here, eyeing him covetously. However, they were all waiting for him to die. He was too old, and it was very difficult for him to even lift his head. The power of the runes appeared and was dispersing on its own accord. The entire area was shrouded in mystery. He is actually taking the initiative to disperse the runes on his body. Lin Yu finally realized what was going on. He needed the runes on the dragon's body to complete his transformation. It was clear that the dragon wanted to scatter the runic symbols on its body on its own accord so that no one else could obtain them. It wanted to bury the runic symbols with itself. Lin Yu wasn't anxious. His heart was filled with worry. He felt that this might be a trick of the giant dragon. It wanted to take the initiative to force the strange beasts that were hibernating here to appear. In fact, this was indeed the case. At this moment, some exotic beasts couldn't bear to watch any longer. They appeared around the giant dragon and attacked it from behind. It was a humanoid beast with sharp fangs from the Qing Miao clan. It was 100 feet tall, but the blood energy on its body surged into the heavens. Its fingernails were 3 feet long, like sharp heavenly blades, enough to cut through divine gold. His attack was successful, and it directly pierced through the giant dragon's scales, causing blood to gush out. Boom! Under the twisting of the giant dragon, more than half of the mountain peak was directly broken. He was already prepared for it. He struck out with his claw and crushed the ferocious-looking beast, causing a mist of blood to scatter in the air. However, it was obvious that there was more than one beast here. 5 more appeared in different directions. Their purpose of coming here was to obtain the runic power on the giant dragon's body. But now that the giant dragon was about to scatter on its own accord, they couldn't help but want to kill the giant dragon that was about to fall and send it on its last journey. At this moment, the broken body of the ferocious-looking beast appeared in front of Lin Yu. Boom! It smashed a big hole in the ground. Lin Yu wasn't in a hurry to take it away. This beast wasn't much weaker than the giant dragon, but it was too anxious. This was obviously a trap set by the giant dragon. It wanted to take away a few powerful beasts before it fell. Lin Yu stared at him intently. At this moment, he found a problem. Although the giant dragon was covered in blood under the continuous attacks, the aura on its body was still blazing. It was constantly fighting these 5 exotic beasts. Lin Yu knew that there were other exotic beasts in hibernation, waiting for an opportunity to strike. However, Lin Yu had already realized it. This beast isn't transforming. It wants to break through to a higher realm. The giant dragon was definitely the most ancient existence in this world. After countless years of devouring runes, it had reached a certain critical point and was about to break through. However, it was indeed old and couldn't attack all the overlords of the exotic beasts. Now, it was using its methods to lure the other overlords of the exotic beasts to come and kill them one by one. Then it would absorb all their runes and break through to the next realm. Therefore, the body of the exotic beast that it killed was obviously reserved for it. If Lin Yu appeared and took it away, it might be exposed and would be hunted down. Although Lin Yu could escape, its refining of runes would be in vain. Lin Yu wasn't in a hurry. He was still in hibernation. As more and more exotic beasts joined the battle, almost all of the overlords in the depths had gathered. Their intellect wasn't low either. At this moment, they could tell that the giant dragon was old and wanted to make use of them to break through to the next realm. The roar of the dragon reverberated through the entire world. No matter how strong the giant dragon was, it was still extremely strenuous for it to take on dozens of quasi-overlords alone. Before long, it was severely injured. Even its tail was chopped off by half. It fell to the ground with a loud boom. Lin Yu caught sight of the wound on the dragon's tail. There were thousands of runes coiling around it, as though they had already fused into its flesh. It wanted to fuse with its body. Lin Yu was certain of it now. The giant dragon was definitely trying to make use of the exotic beast here to take that final step and fuse its body with the runes completely. The reason why it had tried to disintegrate the runes earlier on was to allow the runes within its body to fuse further. I can't stay here for long. Lin Yu realized this point. If the giant dragon were to succeed, its strength would definitely surpass that of a half-step utmost being and step into the utmost being. By then, who knew what sort of horrifying power it would possess? If Lin Fan were to be discovered, things would get troublesome. However, it wasn't as though Lin Yu couldn't reap any benefits. At this moment, The giant dragon no longer had the chance to extricate itself, as it was being attacked relentlessly. At the same time, there were a couple of overlords that were being ripped into pieces by the giant dragon. Lin Yu's body was hidden within the corpses. He was extremely secretive, as he kept the corpses of the exotic beasts within his inner world. However, just as Lin Yu was about to take away the final exotic beast corpse, something unexpected happened. All he saw was a skinny monkey beast leaping up. It wasn't dead yet. Instead, it was making use of the giant dragon to fall to the ground and enter a state of suspended animation. When it caught sight of Lin Yu, it burst forth and nearly killed Lin Yu. This monkey was way too good at hiding its aura, so much so that Lin Yu didn't even notice it by accident. However, even though the monkey was in a state of suspended animation, it was still severely injured by the giant dragon. By now, the power of the runes on its body had dimmed significantly. Lin Yu's chest was nearly sliced open. The moment he retreated, he took out his stone sword and pierced the monkey. He then raised the stone sword and sliced the upper half of the monkey's body into two halves, causing its aura to disappear entirely. Everything happened in an instant. Without any hesitation, Lin Yu kept the corpse of the monkey into his inner world before leaving hurriedly. Chapter 1368. Lin Yu came to a secluded place. He did not know how long this battle was going to last. Right now, he had obtained the corpses of 4 mutated beast overlords. They were still warm, and the runes on them had yet to dissipate. Lin Yu devoured and refined the runes of the 4 mutated beast overlords together. Gradually, a mysterious glow appeared on his body. He had reached a critical stage of his metamorphosis. Initially, he had wanted to use the runes of the dying colossal dragon to complete his metamorphosis. However, things had developed to a level that was beyond his expectations. Thankfully, he had obtained the corpses of the 4 mutated beast overlords, allowing him to complete his metamorphosis smoothly. With the runes of the 4 mutated beast overlords, Lin Yu's battle body would definitely reach an unimaginable level. By then, the mutated beasts of this world would no longer be able to pose any threat to him. Even the colossal dragon that was about to complete the final step would not be able to do so. However, the prerequisite was that the colossal dragon would not complete the final step after killing the mutated beast overlords. If that really happened, Lin Yu would have no choice but to leave. After all, even though there was only a difference of 2 words between a half-step utmost being and an utmost being, the difference in strength was incomparable. If Lin Yu did not utilize the power of his Dao fruit, he would definitely not be able to match up to the colossal dragon. I hope that the colossal dragon has not reached the final step by the time I'm done with my metamorphosis. Lin Yu hid in a cave. Slowly, he closed his eyes and began his metamorphosis. The runes on his body were intertwining, devouring, and fusing with one another. The mutated beasts of this world could be categorized as evolving through devouring. This method was extremely cruel and tyrannical. However, it could allow one's strength to grow at the fastest speed possible. This was also one of the reasons why Lin Yu had been staying in this place for the past 200 years. He was in the midst of a deep level of metamorphosis. His 5 senses had become extremely weak. The blood chi on Lin Yu's body was retracted. Within it, countless runes were surging. His battle body was growing at an unimaginable speed. Time passed by continuously. In the blink of an eye, 10 years had passed. Lin Yu's hair had grown so long that it reached the ground. His body was undergoing a drastic transformation as the impurities inside it were being expelled. Every pore was filled with filth, and there were even broken bones that were expelled from the body. At this time, Lin Yu's body was shrinking, and only the divine substance was left. He looked like a 7- or 8-year-old child. His skin was as white as a flawless jade. Moreover, the runes surging on his body were slowly withdrawing, merging into his new bones and flesh. The strange beasts of this world only had 1 true bone or a few drops of true blood. But now, Lin Yu had absorbed the runes of the 4 overlords. In addition to the tens of thousands of strange beasts from before, every part of his body was filled with true bone and true blood. He was incomparably powerful. 5 years passed. Lin Yu slowly opened his eyes with a feeling of returning to his natural state. He got up and moved with the power of wind and thunder. Lightning kept surging around his body, which was breathtaking. Then he looked at the broken bones and filth around him. He raised his hand and saw his tender arm. He couldn't help but shake his head. His body quickly returned to the appearance of an adult. However, after this transformation, his skin was even fairer. There were endless mysterious substances in his bones and flesh. A terrifying aura of life appeared on his body. I'm afraid I can become a medicine in human form now. Lin Yu wasn't joking. His body was now full of divine substance. Even a drop of his blood had the effect of regenerating flesh and bones. It could prolong a person's life by countless years. However, the power it brought was also unimaginable. Just the aura it emitted was enough to cause the entire mountain range to collapse with a loud bang. Lin Yu looked at the silent world. He couldn't sense the aura of other strange beasts at this time. He couldn't help but frown. Could it be that the giant dragon has succeeded? He came to the place where the battle had taken place. At this time, there were corpses of strange beasts everywhere. However, the blood had dried up and the runes had been absorbed. Lin Yu came to the ruins of the towering mountain peak. During the battle, the mountain peak had been flattened, forming a huge, deep pit. Lin Yu came to the bottom of the deep pit. There were still remnants of the terrifying aura of the battle. Lin Yu's body had now reached the late stage of the Tao channeling realm and was extremely powerful. Moreover, it was definitely different from ordinary late-stage Taoists. After refining thousands of runes, Lin Yu could shatter the universe with a raise of his hand. No, Lin Yu had completed the transformation and no longer needed to seal his cultivation and divine sense. At this time, he fully released his divine sense. The origin runes condensed by the universe fire and burial ice in his eyes moved and saw through all illusions. I see. Lin Yu's lips curled into a smile. He came to a place of ruins. It was suppressed by a huge rock and looked very ordinary. However, nothing could hide from Lin Yu's eyes. He emitted a wisp of aura and directly shattered the huge rock. The scene below appeared. A black dragon that was 10 feet long was crawling. The runes on its body were intertwined and fused into its body. Its physical body had become very illusory, as if its entire body was made of runes. At this time, it saw Lin Yu's figure. It kept roaring as if it was threatening. The giant dragon had indeed succeeded in killing all the overlords here. However, it had also suffered a huge problem. After absorbing the runes of all the overlords, it went to other places and removed all the threats. All of the beast overlords that hadn't participated in the battle were killed. It fused all the runes together. Now, it was hibernating under the huge rock and going through the final transformation. However, it did not expect that there would be an outsider in this world. Moreover, it had hidden so well, but it was still found out. Lin Yu looked at the black dragon that had turned into 100 feet long. There was no emotion in his eyes. This giant dragon was almost about to take the final step. After completing the final transformation, its body would turn into runes, and it would be indistinguishable from one another. It would definitely have supreme strength. However, all of this was just a wedding dress for Lin Yu. The giant dragon suddenly attacked Lin Yu. The dragon's tail twitched and the void exploded. The endless power directly caused a huge crack to spread out in this deep pit. Although the giant dragon was very weak now, it was about to complete the final transformation and had endless power. It could still pose a threat to Lin Yu. However, it could only pose a threat. If it was a dozen years ago, Lin Yu might have been afraid. However, Lin Yu had completely fused the runes after completing the transformation. Coupled with his own cultivation, what kind of storm could this giant dragon cause? Lin Yu raised his hand, and the power of his physical body manifested. The ground under his feet cracked inch by inch, spreading far and wide. Even the mountains collapsed with a rumble. Lin Yu smashed the dragon's tail with a punch. Then, he took a step and broke the giant dragon's spine. The pain came at the right time. Lin Yu did not torture the giant dragon. The space-time Dao Law appeared in his hand and directly cut off its head. Now, the giant dragon was about to take the final step. There was no blood in its body, only the runes. Every time a ferocious scene appeared, Lin Yu stood directly on the giant dragon's corpse and slowly refined everything in its body. 1 year and 50 years passed. Although Lin Yu had completely mastered the power of runes, it took him dozens of years to absorb all the vital energy of the giant dragon. Chapter 1369. The power contained in it was too great. It was the biggest reason why Lin Yu's combat physique could advance into the supreme realm. After Lin Yu absorbed the dragon's primeval essence, he stored it in his body and was not in a hurry to refine it. His advancement was too fast, and the dragon's primeval essence was too terrifying. He could only refine it slowly. This required a certain amount of time. Hence, Lin Yu was not anxious. After accumulating for 10 years, the power was transmitted to his entire body because of the advancement of his battle physique. Lin Xiu's cultivation and divine thought had naturally reached the late stage of Dao induction. There was nothing here that Lin Yu was worthy of staying. Hence, he did not stay and walked out of this place. After arriving at the origin land of the desolation, now that Lin Yu had advanced once again, his speed was much faster than before. It only took him 50 years to return to Imperial City. He still wanted to see Linley first. At this moment, Linley's condition was not very good. He had entered the space-time hall and entered a deep sleep, using the flow of time to suppress his body. In Imperial City, Lin Yu was the only top combat power left. During this period of time, he did not leave Imperial City. Instead, he used the resources in his hands to strengthen the foundation of Imperial City. During this period, he was constantly refining the dragon's primeval essence that he had obtained. The power in his body was constantly growing. 100 years passed just like that. Lin Yu had already passed the exotic beast runes that he had obtained to everyone in Imperial City. Every rune was an unimaginable body-tempering technique, and Lin Yu had completely grasped the mysteries of the runes. Under his guidance, everyone in Imperial City grasped it very quickly. Their strength grew even stronger. Now, Lin Yu had sensed that there seemed to be a situation on the side of the strange creatures. At this moment, Lin Yu stood on the city wall of Imperial City with worry in his eyes. At this moment, Bao Jiaming also appeared. He stood beside Lin Yu and said, "It seems that the day of the final battle is getting closer." At this moment, Bao Jiaming's gaze was deep. It was as if, at this moment, he no longer resembled himself. Lin Yu knew that Bao Jiaming's background wasn't ordinary, but he had never found out about his true background. From the cultivation method he practiced, he knew that he had a great connection with the 8th universe. That was all. "Brother Lin, from now on, I'll be in deep slumber to prepare for the final battle." Bao Jiaming didn't hide anything and directly told Lin Yu his true identity. "I am the reincarnation of the 8th universe back then, Heavenly Dream Paragon. Due to a special Dao technique, I didn't step into the land of reincarnation during that battle in ancient history. Instead, I reincarnated in the land of origin." Bao Jiaming's eyes were filled with sadness. This was also why he hated it when the people in the ancient city mentioned his identity. Everyone in the ancient city only knew that Bao Jiaming was merely the successor of the Heavenly Dream Paragon. However, he did not know that Bao Jiaming was actually the reincarnation of the true utmost being Skydream. Only Tian, Yi, and a few others knew about this secret. The biggest reason why Bao Jiaming didn't like it when others mentioned his identity was that he had his own memories in this world. He was never anyone else but himself. This was why he was unwilling to awaken his memories. He didn't know if he would still be himself when that time came. Or perhaps he would already be the Heavenly Dream Paragon at that time. Sometimes I even wonder if I only exist in a dream of the Heavenly Dream Paragon. Bao Jiaming stood on top of the Imperial City and looked into the distance. However, he already had a feeling that the day of the final battle was approaching. When the time came, if he insisted on doing so, how would he protect everything he cared about? Was he going to rely on his early-stage Tao realm strength? He felt a deep sense of powerlessness. Lin Yu couldn't do anything about it. He could only look at Bao Jianming. Even Lin Yu didn't know if Bao Jianming would still be Bao Jianming after this round of seclusion. Before I go into seclusion, let's drink again. Bao Jianming smiled. All right. Lin Yu nodded. Just on top of the city wall, looking at the boundless scenery in the distance. It's quite pleasant. Bao Jianming laughed. Bao Jianming waved his hand, and a stone table appeared on top of the imperial city. He had brought it from the ancient city. You provide the luggage, I'll provide the food and wine. As he spoke, a pot of immortal wine appeared on the stone table. I brought this from the Immortal Pass. It's called the Immortal Wine. You have to taste it properly, Lin Yu said. Bao Jianming adjusted quickly. Looking at the wine on the table, he laughed. Immortal wine is good. Let's drink to our heart's content today. Lin Yu nodded. The wine cups were filled. After the two drank a few cups of wine, they both looked out of the city wall at the same time. At this time, they were drinking on top of the city wall. They didn't know how long it would be before this place turned into a battlefield of death. They also didn't know how many living beings would die on the city wall. This was all unknown. The two didn't think about anything else. They only cared about themselves and drank. Soon, the immortal wine that Lin Yu had brought from Ming Tianzuan was almost finished. There's so many kinds of wine in the world, but it depends on who is drinking with me. Bao Jianming smiled. Then, he took out his treasure collection. They drank for an entire night. I wonder if this wine will still taste the same after I come out of seclusion. Why don't I drink it all now, so it won't go to waste? Bao Jianming looked at the wine in the cup with a bitter expression. It won't, Brother Bao. Don't worry. Lin Yu said slowly. Brother Lin, you don't have to comfort me. Bao Jianming shook his head. When the time comes, I'll guide your true spirit out. Lin Yu wasn't joking, nor was he trying to comfort him. Lin Yu had the right to say that. After absorbing the true spirit of the giant dragon, he already had the capital to advance to the supreme battle strength. When the time comes, Lin Yu might be able to use his 3 lives Tao fruit to awaken Bao Jianming's true spirit. Your friend is worth it. Bao Jianming was stunned for a moment, then immediately laughed. The two drank until the morning of the next day. At their current realm, the world's wine couldn't make them drunk. However, Bao Jianming had fallen asleep on the table. Drinking wasn't intoxicating, but it was himself. Lin Yu didn't wake Bao Jianming up. Instead, he got up and looked at the ray of light at the end of the sky. His eyes were incomparably deep. No one knew what he was thinking. Now that he had left the 12 universes for nearly 10,000 years, he didn't know how his old friends were doing. Maybe after he had the supreme battle strength, he could return to the 12 universes and see his old friends before the war. Lin Yu didn't have much confidence in this war. Chapter 1370. Lin Yu withdrew his gaze from outside the Emperor City. Several hours later, Bao Jianming slowly woke up. After bidding farewell to Lin Yu, he entered the space-time hall to undergo the final awakening. Now, the strange race had begun to stir. One could see the black clouds at the end of the horizon. It was getting thicker and thicker, covering the sky and the sun. One couldn't see the end of it, and it was gradually spreading to other parts of the origin ground. This strange black fog made one instinctively feel apprehensive. However, there was no point in worrying about it now. Lin Yu and Lin Li discussed for a while and got the general idea. Now, the strange race should have nearly 10,000 years before launching their true attack. At that time, heaven and earth would be destroyed and all creatures would die. It would be the true final battle. 10,000 years was a long time, but in the long history of ancient times, it was just a mottled stream of light, a blink of an eye. Compared to the entire history of ancient times, it was too short. It was so short that it was almost impossible to do anything substantial. Lin Yu didn't despair. He spent the next 100 years using the power of the Divine King's decree to support the space-time hall, hatching all the stone eggs. He also completely tamed the 5 strange beasts he obtained from the secret place. There were endless runes here for them to comprehend. Therefore, their cultivation speed was extremely fast. In less than 100 years, they reached the divine king realm. Lin Yu now had almost all of the runes in the secret place. Under his guidance, the 5 strange beasts grew at an even more shocking speed. After everything was done, now, the Emperor's city had the Stone Spirit Army led by his puppets. Together with the strange beasts that were still growing, their strength and foundation were already unimaginable. Even the fighting strength of the Ancestor Realm was no less than a few thousand, and the original God Realm was more than 100. However, the main problem facing the Imperial Pass was that there were too few top experts. Only Lin Yu, Bao, Jiaming, and that old man were in the Dao Attraction Realm. However, even in the Dao Attraction Realm, in the final battle, it was difficult for them to play any role. They were just cannon fodder. Lin Yu also realized this point. The current Imperial city was too weak. There had to be someone who could suppress the origin grounds. Lin Yu was in seclusion. He wanted to use this time to completely refine the true origin of the giant dragon in his body, so that his battle constitution could reach the highest level and give him the highest combat strength. At that time, there would be hope in the battle. At the same time, he was also thinking that his 3 lifetime Dao fruit had always been in a hazy state and was difficult to approach. He was thinking of fusing with it. In this way, he could reach the highest level. He had completely suppressed the anomaly. Lin Yu was currently in the depths of the space-time hall. The flow of time here was 100 times slower than the outside world. However, he still felt that there wasn't enough time here. Breaking through to the highest level was a long and arduous process. Since ancient times, only a few dozen people had reached that level. In the universe and the land of origin, the population base was so huge that it couldn't be counted in billions. However, in the long history of history, the number of utmost beings that were born could be counted with one's fingers. Lin Yu's goal wasn't to stop at the utmost beings, but to truly break through. Only then would he be able to completely suppress the Black Calamity. At this moment, he was sitting cross-legged, and his body was emitting the power of runes. However, no specific runes could be seen on his body now. They had been fused into his body and were indistinguishable from each other. Right now, every drop of his blood contained the power of runes of the origin. As time passed, one could sense that the power in Lin Yu's body was constantly growing. He was almost at the peak of the Dao Induction Realm. The highest level was also known as the Dao Severing Realm. It required one to sever oneself. There were 5 levels in total. Severing emotions to become an immortal, severing kindness to become a devil, severing obsession to become a Buddha, severing the physical body to become a ghost, severing the soul to become a demon. This was the stage that one had to go through to enter the Dao Severing Realm. There were many dangers in it, and all kinds of strange things could happen. However, Lin Yu wasn't in a hurry to figure out the realm. This was because his body already had such power. As long as he refined it slightly, he would have it. Right now, the most important thing was for him to have the highest combat strength. As for the path of the Dao Severing Realm, it might take endless time to settle down. In the blink of an eye, 1,000 years had passed in the outside world. In other words, 10,000 years had passed in this world. At this moment, the power in Lin Yu's body had already reached a critical point and was at the half-step utmost level. However, something strange was happening. At this moment, Lin Yu's face was haggard. His hair had already turned white without any luster. There was a huge problem with his body that was almost irreversible. That was because Lin Yu wanted to have the highest combat strength without the Dao Severing Realm. Since ancient times, there had never been anyone who had succeeded. The signs of nirvana on Lin Yu's body were still expanding. At this moment, Lin Yu's consciousness seemed to have arrived at a place of chaos that had yet to be developed. There were no physical objects, and it was illusory. Even Lin Yu's consciousness was hazy, and he was almost in a lost state. Where am I? Lin Yu's consciousness awakened. He looked at his surroundings with a puzzled look in his eyes. As he continued to wander about, the light in front of him started to fade. Light gradually appeared in front of them. It was very weak, but in this desolate space, it was very eye-catching. This light had an extremely strong attraction for Lin Yu. Unknowingly, after a long time, Lin Yu had already forgotten who he was. As for what he was doing right now, he could only rely on his initial consciousness. He was getting closer to that light. That light seemed to exist between eternity and nothingness. It was unreliable and untouchable. Even until now, the size of the light had not changed in the slightest. It was as though Lin Yu was standing where he was without approaching at all. "Why can't I get close to that light?" Lin Yu murmured softly. However, in the outside world, his physical body was undergoing a horrifying change. His body was decaying continuously. Just like the bark of an old tree, it rustled and fell onto the ground. It was horrifying. Lin Yu's body no longer had any divine substance. At this moment, it was as though it had completely passed away. Coupled with the terrifying power, his physical body had already withered. Something big had happened to him. However, he was in a state of seclusion. No one could save him. He could only rely on himself. A ray of light. That ray of light was also a ray of hope. Lin Yu had underestimated the terror of the supreme power. Although he had touched upon that realm, the degree of danger involved in truly merging with one's body was way too horrifying. Almost no one could resist such a mighty power. Moreover, Lin Yu had not broken through to the supreme realm at all. He had merely obtained that power in advance. The supreme power was not to be blasphemed. This was a great taboo. In the dark space, Lin Yu's wisp of consciousness was almost completely dissipating. It was like a candle in the wind, flickering continuously. It seemed as though it could really be extinguished at any time. Now, there was nothing that could save Lin Yu. He could only rely on himself. The speed at which Lin Yu's consciousness was disappearing was almost irreversible. However, at this moment, a dazzling radiance suddenly erupted from Lin Yu's consciousness. He was no longer confused. His eyes shone brightly as he looked at the only ray of light in this world. Chapter 1371. I've experienced countless great battles. How can I die here? Lin Yu let out a soft shout. The entire world shook, as though chaos thunder had exploded. Unparalleled speed exploded forth. In the blink of an eye, Lin Yu's divine will had already reached the deepest part of this world. He arrived at the place where the ray of light was. The only ray of light was currently in front of Lin Yu. It was just a ray of light that was extremely far away. Now, Lin Yu was approaching. This ray of light had already transformed into the primordial sun, emitting a blazing radiance. This was what Lin Yu relied on to become a paragon. Deep inside, there seemed to be another Lin Yu seated in the lotus position. He was calm and peaceful, as though nothing could stir his emotions. Within the primordial sun, Lin Yu seemed to have existed here since time immemorial, never leaving. Or perhaps he had been waiting for Lin Yu's divine will to arrive. Lin Yu reached out with his palm and touched the radiance here. Rumble. The primordial sun emitted trillions of rays of light, completely enveloping this place. Lin Yu's divine will was swallowed up. An unparalleled power began to appear on Lin Yu's body in the real world. The supreme aura disappeared in the blink of an eye. But that kind of pressure caused the entire space-time hall to tremble. Lin Yu had reached the critical moment of his breakthrough. At this moment, he woke up and came to the space-time hall, outside Lin Yu's secluded meditation. It's the aura of a paragon. Lin Li's face changed. He knew that Lin Yu's talent was terrifying, but he never would have imagined that while he was in deep slumber, Lin Yu had already begun to attempt to break through to that level. How shocking was this? This aura clearly indicated that Lin Yu was about to succeed. Even Lin Li, who had lived for countless years and had witnessed many miracles, felt a hint of excitement in his heart. How long has it been since our 12 universes? Is another paragon about to be born? Lin Li murmured. If that was the case, there would be hope for the future generations. For Lin Yu to break through to the supreme realm at this time, it was great news for the living beings of the universe and the land of origin. Lin Yu's aura connected with heaven and earth. At this moment, a large area of the origin land was shrouded in a strange phenomenon. Divine light descended from the sky. One could see the phantoms of gods and devils appearing in the sky, surrounding the space-time Great Hall and worshipping it. It was as if they were welcoming the birth of their master. When Lin Yu was at the original God realm, he didn't control the great path of the origin. However, when he broke through to the highest level of battle prowess, the 3,000 great Daos of the land of origin were all shaken, producing an unimaginable phenomenon. Almost the entire land of origin could sense the changes here. They could see the auspicious clouds appearing in the sky. Some of the old monsters in the ancient city were also awakened at this time. The first emperor stood on the city wall with the ancestral dragon by his side. His deep eyes looked in the direction of the imperial city. The birth of a supreme realm expert was a big event since ancient times. Someone has reached the supreme realm. After the old monsters bowed to the first emperor, they looked into the distance, and their expressions changed drastically. Soon, their emotions became agitated. Although they didn't know who had broken through, to the living beings of the universe and the land of origin, the benefits were huge. At this moment, Tian Yi appeared on the city wall with the primal chaos on his body. Feeling this aura, his chaos divine, I crossed the space and directly reached the direction of the imperial city. It's Lin Yu's aura. Tian Yi was never moved by something. Although he felt Lin Yu's aura at this time, his tone was still calm as he said slowly, "What?" Among the old monsters, someone was shocked and said with disbelief, "Impossible. How long has it been since he broke through to the Tao realm? How could he break through in such a short time? Could it be the fortune left by his ancestor?" Someone guessed. However, the old master of the Azure Universe Pavilion shook his head and said, "Even if he has the legacy of his ancestor, it's impossible for him to reach such heights in such a short time." The old master of the Azure Universe Pavilion knew many things about the utmost realm. At this moment, he was assertive. However, this phenomenon was really happening. Lin Yu was breaking through. Furthermore, the abnormal sign in the sky was gradually growing stronger. The first emperor seemed to have realized something as he disappeared from where he was. At his level, the world was just a short distance away. Even if he hadn't grasped the Tao laws of space, a distance of billions of miles was just a single thought. He came to the top of the imperial city. A horrifying aura burst out from his body. This had Lin Yin and the others shocked as they looked at the city wall cautiously. Everyone knelt down. Only Lin Yin's bloodline showed signs of reverting to its ancestor. It was the bloodline of the human emperor, and she could barely withstand the pressure of the first emperor. The ancestor dragon appeared in the sky as well, faintly visible in the clouds. The bloodline of the human emperor? The first emperor looked at Lin Yin. At this moment, Lin Yin was still moving forward, even though blood was seeping out from the corners of his lips. He knew that right now, his master was at a critical point in his breakthrough. He definitely could not allow anyone to disturb him. He wanted to activate the universe fire and burial ice surrounding the imperial city. Lin Yin, the first emperor, has no ill intentions. At this moment, Lin Li appeared. The pressure of the first emperor was being emitted out involuntarily. Lin Li had to activate the power of the space-time palace in order to withstand this pressure. Lin Li and the first emperor both knew that the commotion caused by Lin Yu's breakthrough would definitely attract the attention of the mysterious race. "Thank you, first emperor, for coming to stand guard for God King Lin." Lin Li cupped his hands. He also knew that if the Freak clan sent a large army to stop Lin Yu from breaking through, they would be in trouble. The imperial city right now would definitely be hard to defend against. Only an unparalleled powerful being like the first emperor would be able to suppress the invasion of the mysterious race. The first emperor nodded his head slightly. "It just so happens that I have a relic of the human emperor here. Now that I've seen his descendant, I shall pass it down to you." The first emperor waved his hand, and a tattered banner appeared in the air above the imperial city. It was stained with fresh blood, emanating a sense of death. Lin Yin's eyes were unconsciously filled with tears of blood. Above this banner was definitely the blood of his clansmen. In fact, it even contained the blood of his ancestor, the human emperor. This was an enormous stroke of good fortune. Sensing Lin Yin's aura, it immediately appeared by his side. A supreme power emanated from it. This was a legacy that had been passed down from generation to generation. Although Lin Yin had already awakened his bloodline, he didn't have any supreme techniques. Lin Yu's techniques weren't suited for him. Now that he had the legacy of his ancestor, it could make up for what Lin Yin lacked. Lin Yin's eyes were filled with a terrifying power, a gaze capable of ripping apart the 9 heavens. Right now, his resolute face carried a sense of vicissitudes. His black hair was white, dancing in the wind. Right now, it was impossible to tell if he was Lin Yin or if the former human emperor had reappeared. However, this sort of sign only lasted for an instant. Soon, Lin Yin regained his calm. The banner had already entered his divine will, undergoing the nourishment of his aura. "Thank you, First Emperor." Lin Yin bowed solemnly. This was a relic of the former human emperor. Now that it was in his hands, it contained the complete legacy of the human emperor. Not too long from now, a young human emperor would definitely reappear in the world. Just as Lin Yu's aura was growing stronger and stronger, Lin Yu's eyes lit up. The first emperor's gaze turned toward a certain direction in the air, and he stretched out a finger. The skies changed color. Chapter 1372. Puff! A corpse fell from the sky. Soon, it turned into black smoke and disappeared from the world. This was a strange quasi-beast king. Under the protection of the first emperor, there was nowhere for him to hide, even though he had hidden his aura very well. "Strange creatures, do you want to start a war now?" The first emperor's voice was not loud, but it was filled with majesty. He looked into the distance. He questioned. The first emperor was a ferocious person. Otherwise, he would not have killed his way to the ancient city from the current territory of the strange creatures after awakening on Earth. At that time, his realm had not fully recovered. He killed his way to the strange creatures' territory, causing them to tremble in fear. Therefore, at that time, the quasi-kings of the strange creatures came out in full force to stop the first emperor. However, they did not succeed in the end. At that time, the first emperor had fully recovered his peak strength. Even if King Yu and King Tsong appeared now, they would not be able to do anything to him. It's indeed shocking. I didn't expect that there would be someone in this world who could reach our realm. Endless black fog surged. A few figures that looked down on the world slowly emerged from within. They were surrounded by ancient stars that had been contaminated, showing off their extreme strength. King Yu was among them. Now, the aura on his body was even more terrifying, as if he was about to recover to his peak state. I didn't expect 2 of the 10 strange kings to come. The first emperor was not afraid at all. He stood on the ancient city, his black and gold dragon robe fluttering. Even if the loser uses the land of reincarnation to recover, he still can't escape the fate of falling in this world. One of the peak sovereigns said slowly, "King of Ruins, have you forgotten the pain from before?" The first emperor said slowly. Words could not move this kind of creature in the slightest. The King of Ruins, who was called the King of Ruins, was sitting on a throne made of bones with one hand supporting his head. His expression was calm. His body was incomparably majestic, as if it could explode the world. The tainted stars of the all heavens revolved around him and were constantly being destroyed. "You were able to injure me back then. I wonder when you still have such strength now?" Su Wang said slowly. In the battle in the ancient history, it was the first emperor who fought against the King of Ruins. In that battle, even the origin ground was almost destroyed. It was earth-shattering, and even gods and ghosts would weep. In the end, the first emperor severely injured him, and under the strange power of the ancestral land, he was only able to recover in this era. If it weren't for the strange ancestral land, the Ruins King might have been killed by the first emperor. The 10 uncanny kings were the most powerful existences other than the emperor. They were invincible in the heavens and the earth. They had once been the main force in the invasion of the universe and had killed countless powerful beings. Eventually, it was the first-generation God King of the entire universe, who was also the most powerful being amongst the utmost beings, who had stepped in to defend against them. The hands of the 10 uncanny kings were stained with the blood of too many universe creatures. Too many to record. Even Unreal's throne was made from the bones of the universe's most powerful beings. Even now, it still exuded a supreme aura. Enemies who have been defeated by me have no right to speak. The first emperor's body emitted an unparalleled aura. However, at this moment, the strange black fog had completely enveloped this place. Even the phenomenon caused by Lin Yu's breakthrough was suppressed and no longer appeared. Only the aura continued to surge. Everyone in the imperial city was shocked. At this moment, Linley let out a faint sigh. A broken longsword appeared in his hand. It was filled with the power of the space-time Tao Law. The aura of the space-time palace was added to Linley's body. He stood on the city wall. His body was no longer hunched. Instead, it was incomparably tall and straight. His white hair danced in the wind. He looked straight at the strange throne in front of him. In his eyes, there was a resolute battle intent. The remnants of Lin Xian's subordinates? I didn't expect that they weren't all killed back then. The Tsang King said, "The 10 uncanny kings, no, it should be the 9 kings now. Are you in such a hurry to die?" Linley appeared beside the first emperor. He had a sarcastic tone. This was obviously meant for the Tsang King and the Ruins King. Only a few people knew that when the 10 uncanny kings invaded the universe, they were unstoppable. Everyone was in despair, and the utmost beings fought bitterly. However, Lin Xian killed one of the sovereigns. Even the strange ancestral land couldn't revive him. Linley looked at the long sword in his hand. He seemed to be talking to himself. Even now, this sword still has that sovereign's blood on it. Linley laughed. He had been waiting for this day for far too long. His old friends from the past had all died in that battle. He was left behind to struggle at death's door. He was left behind by Lin Xian alone. Now that the uncanny kings had appeared, he was going to fight one last battle. Even if he died, he was going to make a name for himself in the 12 universes. "You're good." The Tsang King's eyes turned cold for the first time. The sovereign for back then was his younger brother. Originally, in the uncanny race, 2 sovereigns appeared in one bloodline. How terrifying was that? They were destined to prosper forever. However, in that battle, Lin Xian killed his younger brother. The strange ancestral land couldn't even revive him. This was a huge wave of hatred. Ha! Hatred! This is the first time I've seen a sovereign of the uncanny kings. Linley was close to going crazy. He had seen with his own eyes his brothers, his close friends, fall one by one. The hatred he felt towards the uncanny race was so great that even the passage of time wouldn't be able to erase it. Although Linley was normally calm, like an old man in his twilight years, only after seeing the uncanny kings did he reveal that aura. "Today, I shall destroy all hope for the 12 universes." The Tsang King attacked directly. In front of the sovereign of the uncanny kings, all barriers and formations were useless. Just a single aura was enough to completely destroy the barriers above the imperial city. The uncanny king's aura invaded the city. The founding emperor attacked directly, blocking the uncanny king's aura. At the same time, he moved, appearing directly beneath the uncanny king's aura. His body didn't move, and he stared straight ahead. Today's battle was unavoidable. The uncanny king's ancestral land had already deduced that the person who was about to break through to the paragon level was Lin Yu. In the past, Lin Yu gave the Tsang King too much of a shock before the uncanny king's ancestral land. If it wasn't for Lin Yu, the uncanny king's ancestral land would have already been revived by now. The sovereign of the uncanny king's ancestral land wouldn't be in this state. The universe should have been in their pocket long ago. It was because of Lin Yu that their plan was delayed. Now, even though Lin Yu had caused the uncanny king's ancestral land to be revived earlier, the damage he caused was obviously more serious. The Tsang King was still recuperating, and no one knew when he would wake up. "I am a #1 general under Lin Jigao, Linley. Uncanny brat, come and die," Linley shouted. At this moment, he locked onto the Tsang King. The aura of a paragon was leaking out from his body. He knew that although he already had the power of a paragon, he had no chance of winning against the 10 uncanny kings. He could only do his best to stain them with blood, but even so, it was enough. He had long grown tired of the days of hibernation. If it wasn't for the fact that he saw Lin Yu, in order to protect him, he would have already killed his way into the uncanny king's ancestral land with the means left behind by Lin Xian. Chapter 1373. Under their auras, the sky began to collapse. Everyone in the imperial city was filled with fighting spirit. At this moment, the strange creatures had completely invaded the imperial city. Kill. After years of development, the imperial city's strength had reached a frightening level. Kill. Lin Yan's eyes were filled with killing intent. Holding the banishing evil sword, he charged at the forefront. Interesting. The livestock that were reared back then actually dares to attack their master. The person who had killed Lin Yan's sister was also present. As a direct descendant of the strange creature's royal family, he also appeared on the battlefield. Kill them all in the main hall and destroy their last hope. A direct descendant of the strange creature's royal family said with a cruel expression. Lin Yan looked straight at that person, his eyes filled with endless killing intent. Although he had been numb back then, he still had true feelings. He had watched his sister die in his arms, and his enemy was right in front of him. Lin Yan could no longer maintain his composure. His eyes were bloodshot as he charged at that man. Not bad. Your courage is commendable. The man sneered. The man had long reached the Tao induction realm. He didn't care about Lin Yan at all. Even though Lin Yan had reached the initial Tao induction realm with the help of his ancestors' legacy. But the gap of one realm was so huge that it wasn't something that could be made up for by mere thoughts and hatred. Back then, my master was able to kill your strange creatures. Why can't I do the same? Lin Yan slashed out with his sword, destroying the void. He had already charged into the strange creature's ranks and was now at the forefront. Everyone was influenced by Lin Yan. They had been reared in captivity for countless years. They hated the strange creatures greatly. Even though some of them weren't strong enough, they were still fearless and charged forward without fear of death. The number of the strange creatures was simply too terrifying. Even with the addition of rock spirits and strange beasts, the difference in numbers was still obvious. Lin Yan encountered two direct descendants of the strange creature's royal family at the same time. The man had never thought of fighting Lin Yan alone. Lin Yan, someone saw that Lin Yan had been surrounded in battle and was already stained with blood. This is a battlefield, not a duel, idiot. The man stroked his cut cheek as he looked at the weak Lin Yan and scolded coldly. However, Lin Yan didn't seem to care about his injuries at all. His gaze was already locked onto that man. Today, he would definitely slay him under his sword. Shameless. The old man also made his move. They all possessed supreme bloodlines. In terms of talent and bloodline, they were not inferior to the strange royal family. The old man entered the depths of the battlefield. At this time, he was also stained with blood because of the battle with the strange creatures. Even now, he was already at the late stage of Tao induction. When in the face of so many royals, there was still a time when he was exhausted. He had acted now to protect Lin Yan. He did not hesitate to forcefully break through the battlefield and risk being cut in half. However, there were more than just a few members of the strange royal family in this place. They all had cruel smiles on their faces as they surrounded Lin Yan and the old man. "You won't be able to survive today?" the old man asked. The corner of his mouth was full of blood, but he was laughing out loud. "What a pity. I didn't manage to kill more of those strange creatures." A terrifying aura once again erupted from his body. Lin Yan used the universe fire and burial ice to completely destroy that person, the old man reminded. He had already used the power of the origin source and directly charged towards the strange royal family. He wanted to use his own strength to block all the royals surrounding Lin Yan. Elder Gu. There was sadness in Lin Yan's eyes. However, he quickly adjusted his state of mind. Now was not the time to be conflicted. Lin Yan was very decisive. He stretched out his hands, and the universe fire and burial ice outside the imperial city poured into the imperial city along with the tears of blood flowing from his eyes. Countless strange creatures roared in pain as they were incessantly burned. Even the black mist from the strange ancestral land could not revive them again. This was undoubtedly terrifying. Those two substances, shouldn't they be at the edge of the Ming realm? How could they appear here? At this time, the members of the strange royal family had shocked expressions. To the strange race, these two substances were fatal. If they were tainted, even the ancestral land of the strange race would not be able to save them. The universe fire and burial ice were similar to the ancient word that the utmost being had grasped in the past. They could completely wipe out the strange race. Of course, Lin Yin naturally grasped the ancient word as well. At this time, the universe fire and burial ice revolved around his evil vanquisher sword, bringing with them a terrifying aura. At this time, the man's expression finally changed. He was actually retreating uncontrollably. After seeing the universe fire and burial ice, this was the first time he revealed fear. If he were to be entangled by these two substances, even as a member of the strange royal family, he would not be able to escape this calamity. Naturally, Lin Yin would not give him a chance. He wanted to wipe him out completely. Die! Lin Yin only spat out a single word indifferently. Then he attacked. The aura on his body became incomparably terrifying. Right now, it was no weaker than the man who was already in the late stages of the Tao realm. This was unbelievable. The man's pupils contracted slightly as well. Could it be that another living being comparable to Lin Yu has appeared in the universal cage? He was secretly surprised. Back then, Lin Yu had already caused too much shock among the strange race. Back then, he was already able to fight against the direct descendant of the strange royal family, Ming Qingtan, who was known as the most terrifyingly talented person in history. And now, Lin Yin was actually able to fight against him at the early stages of the Tao realm. This caused him to feel a sense of loss. He was a direct descendant of the supreme throne. He was an invincible existence in the same realm. How could he be suppressed by a brat who was only in the early stages of the Tao realm? You have successfully aroused my killing intent, the man said coldly. He used his innate mystic ability, and an illusory, dermic weapon appeared in his hand. There was a strange aura on it. With the appearance of the dermic weapon, everything here seemed to be contaminated. Lin Yin clearly did not want to fight with this man for a long time. He wanted to kill him quickly. Lin Yin was fearless as he took the initiative to attack. Although he was filled with boundless killing intent, he still maintained his calm. A ray of light blossomed in his eyes, carrying with it an extreme killing intent. The man was startled, and his body was immediately restrained. Qi! In this moment of distraction, the long sword in Lin Yin's hand cut him in half. Lin Yin's long sword contained the power of universe fire and burial ice. However, because he needed to support the battlefield, it was a little thin. Therefore, he was unable to completely kill the man with this blow. However, the old man was already under siege and gradually showed signs of being unable to hold on. His body had already exploded several times, but he was still forcibly reforming his body. At this moment, a terrifying force joined the battlefield. A figure with an indifferent expression and gray robes appeared. As he appeared, countless strange substances were turned into fine powder and dissipated on the battlefield. Lin Yu, the direct descendants of a strange royal family, were shocked. Don't panic. This is not Lin Yu. It is just a puppet. A direct descendant of the strange royal family said to the crowd. His eyes could see through the source of everything. This was Lin Yu's rock spirit puppet. It was cultivating in the space-time Great Hall. It cultivated with Lin Yu and had a connection. As Lin Yu's power increased, the rock spirit now had the strength of the peak of the Tao realm. With its appearance, hope appeared on the battlefield. It was as if it had entered a no-man's land and directly killed its way into the depths of the battlefield. One could see that there was blood and broken bones everywhere on the battlefield. Many people had already died in this battle. The battle had reached a tragic level. Chapter 1374. These supreme bloodlines that had been trapped in the strange race were all red-eyed, fighting without regard for their lives. This was their first time fighting against the strange race, but they didn't feel the slightest fear. Children, infants, women, and children were all protected in the space-time hall. They were also red-eyed, wanting to join the battlefield and kill the enemy. None of the living beings in the Imperial City were cowards. Even if they were covered in blood and knew that they were about to die under the siege, they still dragged a few strange race members into the burial ice and cosmic fire, causing their true spirits to completely dissipate. The black mist of the strange race ancestral land couldn't save them. Some strange race members, because the living beings in the Imperial City weren't afraid of death, actually felt fear at this time. In the previous battle, they were fearless because the black mist of the strange race ancestral land could revive them. But now, under the cosmic fire and burial ice, they had lost this advantage. As long as they were infected, there was no possibility of revival. Lin Yu's stone spirit puppet inherited his Tao law and replaced the old man at this time. When he attacked, he sent it into the space-time hall with the space-time Tao law. He single-handedly fought against 9 king-level descendants. It's just a puppet. Even if your true body appeared here, at this realm, you would be killed by us. A man from the strange race spoke. His black armor emitted a dim light, exuding power. He spoke now. Back when Lin Yu entered the strange race as a captive, he was already prepared to attack, but he didn't have a chance. But now, one of Lin Yu's puppets was able to give them such pressure. This was hard for them to accept. The 9 strange race members directly attacked Lin Yu's puppet. The terrifying aftershocks of the battle made everyone retreat. On this battlefield, apart from the 10 people, it was difficult to see other figures. Lin Yin now also had the upper hand. Even if he was covered in blood because of the man's innate divine art, he still didn't have the slightest fear. He held the evil, vanquishing sword in hand, constantly fighting forward. At this time, the man was repeatedly retreating. He had been seriously injured by Lin Yin many times, although he could condense his body. However, under the power of universe fire and burial ice, his cultivation realm had practically fallen. At this moment, he was showing signs of weakness, and this trend was irreversible. Lin Yin was incomparably calm. Her eye technique was unparalleled and could temporarily imprison a man's figure. This undoubtedly made the man even more passive. Now that the man was roaring, the object in his hand had become incomparably illusory and was about to disappear completely. I really regret that I wanted to study your eye technique back then and didn't bury you with your sister, the man said. Even now, he was still provoking Lin Yin. Unfortunately, you won't have the chance in the future, Lin Yin slowly replied. Lin Yin's eye technique erupted with resplendent light as he comprehended the 2 ancient characters. They were like 2 supreme, immortal swords. At this moment, it was not only the power of confinement, but it also directly pierced through the man. It was as if even his existence would be erased. The man's face paled. He looked at the 2 large holes in his chest. He was guiding the strange substance from the sky to come down and heal his wounds. However, he discovered that the hole was difficult to repair. It was filled with a mysterious power that was obstructing the strange substance. Your eye technique. Before he finished speaking, Lin Yin directly arrived in front of the man. He slashed out with his sword. He directly beheaded the man. Lin Yin's gaze directly destroyed the man's divine consciousness, and then suppressed it with universe fire and burial ice. The man completely fell without any surprise. Kill all the strange creatures and show the might of the human emperor's bloodline. Lin Yin held the man's head and roared into the sky. It was earth-shattering and shook everyone's mind. Lin Yin's body was full of fatal injuries. Now that he was in the middle of the battlefield, not a single strange creature dared to approach. Their royal descendants had already been killed. If they went forward now, it would be no different from sending themselves to their deaths. This was the terrifying power. The creatures in the Imperial City were in high spirits. At this moment, they were all roaring. Lin Yin has already killed the royal descendants of the strange creatures. How can we fall behind? Kill! Their shouts shook the sky. The imperial city's fighting spirit soared. At this moment, they all charged forward fearlessly. Even if the strange creatures were endless and endless, they didn't feel the slightest bit of fear in their hearts. At this moment, tears fell from Lin Yin's eyes. He murmured, "Sister, do you see? I've avenged you." Then he locked his head on the battlefield. His eyes were bright. He didn't care about his injuries. He once again joined the battlefield. This battle was destined to be piled up with blood and bones. Now, Lin Yu was still in the midst of a breakthrough. His body in the real world gradually recovered its luster. Powerful power intertwined on it. The Tao of heaven and earth circled around him. His inner world enveloped him within. The three lives Tao fruit in his inner world was chanting sutras, constantly strengthening Lin Yu's body. Since ancient times, no one had ever been able to advance their battle constitution to the highest level in advance. Lin Yu was on the path that no one before him could walk on. He didn't know what was happening in the outside world. At this moment, he had lost all 5 senses. He was like a wooden stake. However, the power of his battle constitution was constantly strengthening. He borrowed the runes of the mysterious world and absorbed and refined the runes of the giant dragon. At this moment, he was constantly transforming. At a certain moment, cracks appeared all over his body, starting from the top of his head. He looked very ferocious. Even his head had cracked. However, new life seemed to be born in the cracks. New bodies were constantly forming inside. The supreme power of runes intertwined on it. It was flowing with brilliant colors. Tao and Tao were faintly manifesting within it. At a certain moment in the end, the phenomenon in the outside world came to an abrupt end. Both the first emperor and Lin Li, who were in the middle of the battle, frowned. At this moment, they were at the highest level and were very sensitive to the world. They didn't know why the phenomenon suddenly disappeared. It seems that we don't have to do anything. He has already failed. King Ruins was cold. He was confronting the first emperor, but now he was separated from him and looked at the phenomenon in the world. The phenomenon turned into a rain of light that sprinkled down. It seemed to indicate Lin Yu's failure. Breaking through to the highest level was extremely dangerous. Since ancient times, there had been less than 1 in 100 people who had reached the peak of the Tao realm. Obviously, Lin Yu's failure was a foregone conclusion. Lin Li was being suppressed by the Song King. There were many Tao injuries on his body, but he didn't care at all. He was in a state of worry. Master, Lin Yinxing had polychoria. He was especially sensitive to the world. When he heard the words of the sovereign outside the capital, his eyes were filled with endless sadness. Some people stood where they were in a daze. The scene of Lin Yu leading them to build the imperial city in the past was still vivid in their minds. Now, Lin Yu had failed. Failing to break through to the highest level meant death. It was no surprise. "Seems like you will have to stay here today, First Emperor," King Ruins said coldly. After all, Lin Li hadn't broken through to the highest level. He had only borrowed Lin Xin's power. At this moment, facing the Song King who was about to return to his peak, he seemed to be having a hard time. The world had already collapsed because of them. But now, their defeat was destined. Although I didn't expect that a small city would have such a fighting strength to stop me, it's a pity that the person who broke through has failed. King Ruins shook his head. Chapter 1375. Everyone was filled with despair and pessimism. Now that Lin Yu had failed, everything became meaningless. Moreover, there were 2 sovereigns now. It will be difficult for the first emperor and Lin Li to stop and kill them. So what if I'm destroyed? Kill. After a brief moment of sadness, Lin Yin dragged his injured body and began to fight again. He swung his long sword, and dozens of strange creatures disappeared for real. Lin Yu's puppet didn't move at all. The 9 members of the royal family attacked Lin Yin. Lin Yin had shocked them too much just now. Even with the help of universe fire and burial ice, he was still able to kill their royal family members who were 2 levels above him. Such talent was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. If he was allowed to grow, he might become the next Lin Yu. They wouldn't allow that to happen. However, the first emperor seemed very calm. At this moment, Linley also sensed something. Lin Yu's disappeared aura reappeared, and it was extremely powerful. In the space-time palace, Lin Yu's body disappeared while he was in seclusion, leaving behind a ground full of wreckage. Lord Song and Lord Ruin's expressions changed. A white-robed figure slowly walked out of the space-time hall. As he appeared, the entire space could not withstand the force of his body and started to crumble. It was Lin Yu. At this moment, his body had broken through to the highest level, and all the runes had been withdrawn. There was a sense of supremacy in his voice. At this moment, he was truly difficult to bury and difficult to overturn. He would remain eternal and indestructible. The supreme power was emitted. Lin Yu walked out of the space-time palace. Following his gaze, the strange creatures that had invaded the imperial city were all destroyed. Universe fire and burial ice surged out from the ground, turning their true spirits into dust. They would never be able to recover. Even the remaining 9 sovereigns couldn't escape this disaster, even if they used the artifacts left behind by their ancestors. All the strange creatures were destroyed under Lin Yu's gaze. This was the supreme power. Lin Yu stepped into the void. His entire being seemed very ethereal and calm, just like an immortal. Now that he was traveling in origin grounds, there was nothing that could stop him. Universe fire and burial ice appeared, directly occupying half of the sky, igniting the strange ancestral land's black mist. A shocking scene appeared in the sky. Lin Yu walked out of the sea of fire. Embers danced in the air as he slowly disappeared from this world. As King Yu and King Su looked at Lin Yu, their emotions, which had remained unchanged since ancient times, finally showed signs of change. In the war before ancient history, more than 90% of the living beings in the universe and the land of origin fell, causing a gap in history. Those who were talented had all perished in that battle. However, in the present age, there were actually later generations that reached this level, able to stand shoulder to shoulder with them. How shocking was this? No, he doesn't have the supreme Tao law. King Su saw through the clues. At this time, Lin Yu only had the supreme aura, but he did not display the special Tao law. The Tao law power that was enough to shock heaven and earth did not appear on his body. Impossible. Since ancient times, no one has ever been able to advance a certain aspect of themselves to the supreme realm in advance, King Song said. After the war, before ancient history, they had carefully studied the techniques of the living beings in the universe. Therefore, they were very familiar with it. At this time, he said directly, "If that's the case, even if you have the supreme aura, it's useless now," King Su said coldly. "I could give it a try." Lin Yu was as calm as an ancient well. He had indeed not completely broken through to the supreme realm. He only had this kind of combat strength. But even so, it was enough. Right now, they had 3 people with supreme battle prowess, and King Yu had not recovered to his peak. The first emperor was enough to suppress King Su. In that case, before the war, let's suppress 1 or 2 sovereigns in advance, the first emperor said casually. He directly locked onto King Su. Their battle had already been set in stone since ancient times. King Su and King Song were fearless. They now knew that Lin Yu had not truly broken through to the supreme realm. Even if you break through to the supreme realm, you won't be able to do much. Back then, more than 1 or 2 supreme beings died in my hands, King Song said. His body was intertwined with Black God order chains, locking down the world. As a sovereign, he had been invincible since ancient times and had the belief of being invincible. At this time, facing Lin Yu and the other 2, he still did not show any signs of fear. Lin Yu and Lin Li faced off against King Song. Strange sovereigns were indeed not easy to deal with. But this was a battlefield, not a duel. The first emperor and Lin Yu had the same idea. No matter what, they had to leave one of the strange sovereigns behind to weaken the strength of the strange race. The first emperor knew that Lin Yu had the clay jar, universe fire, and burial ice. Even against the strange sovereigns, they were still a threat. Lin Yu did not hide anymore. The clay jar appeared in the world, forming a world that covered the entire battlefield. Universe fire and burial ice circled around the battlefield. The first emperor and Linley's seed power caused the inscriptions on the clay jar to materialize and imprint in the void. So that's how it is. To think that this item has been in the place of origin all these years, King Su said slowly. King Tsong also understood now why the ancestral ground would awaken early. It had something to do with the clay jar. It's just that this item is broken and can never be repaired. With this item, it's hard to kill us. King Su said, King, it's eternal and indestructible. Do you still not understand? King Su said, What a joke. Linley's words were a slap to the face. The first emperor did not waste any more words. At this time, the strange matter had already been completely evolved by the clay jar and the ancient words of the first emperor. Without the support of the strange matter, King Su and King Tsong were now facing a direct confrontation. King Su was fearless. Now that he had hibernated in the ancestral ground, not only had his strength recovered to its peak, but it had also strengthened. He knew that the current first emperor, after countless years of reincarnation, could no longer pose any threat to him. Back then, I could defeat you. Today, I can still defeat you. The first emperor's words were filled with majesty and dominance. The entire battlefield was now covered by the clay jar, as if it had turned into another world. All the Taoist laws and strange matter no longer existed. The stone sword appeared in Lin Yu's hand. At the same time, with the support of the God King's badge, he used space-time overlay to increase his strength. Now his body had reached the paramount realm. Even space-time overlay could not destroy his body. He could withstand this power. However, after reaching the paramount realm, the increase of space-time overlay became much smaller. This was the ultimate power of the world. King Tsongda, Linley roared. The injuries on his body instantly healed. This was the power of space-time. At this time, with the support of Lin Xian's technique, Linley temporarily gained this ability. Sword light flashed. The original star turned into dust. King Tsong reached out his palm, which was intertwined with Taoist laws, turning into a world. It directly absorbed the sword light, Lin Yu, and Linley's bodies. This was undoubtedly shocking. Each of the strange sovereigns had the power to destroy a world at will. Within his palm, there was an endless amount of mighty power that could crush all living things. It truly possessed the aura of immortality. Chapter 1376. The origin ground was about to be penetrated by King Yu's attacks. However, under the combined efforts of Linley and Lin Yu, the mighty force disappeared instantly. Lin Yu leaped out and crushed the palm of the Tsong King before dashing towards the latter's body. The sky changed color as the void collapsed. Lin Yu's strength was no weaker than the Tsong King's under the augmentation of space-time. Even though there were no supreme Tao laws surrounding it, just its power alone was enough to make all living beings in the world tremble in fear. They were unable to withstand this power. Under the overflowing power of Lin Yu, the earth was annihilated inch by inch, reduced to nothingness. Lin Yu held the stone sword in one hand and clenched his other hand into a fist as he faced the Tsong King. In the blink of an eye, he was right in front of him. The stone sword that Lin Yu swung out was easily caught. Lin Yu was neither too fast nor too slow. His left fist pressed down like a huge universe. You only have the body of an utmost being without the corresponding Tao laws. You can't hurt me, the Tsong King said slowly. As he raised his hand, a strange, ancient star could be seen within it, and a mist could be seen. Lin Yu's figure slowed down in the blink of an eye. Don't forget that there's still me. The broken sword in Linley's hand was reflected in the sky. The Tao of space-time spread out and covered the entire battlefield. The Tao of space-time was evolving continuously. Lin Xian's Tao of space-time could almost divide yin and yang, becoming the only Tao in the world. Now it was displaying its unparalleled power. Like the wrath of the heavens, it descended under Linley's control. The long river of time appeared, and from it, battle swords appeared one after another. They locked onto the Song King and launched attacks towards his head. Lin Xian, it's Lin Xian again. The Song King snorted coldly. He felt threatened by Lin Li's attacks. However, he maintained his composure. The 10 strange kings were invincible. If not for Lin Xian's appearance, this legend would not have been broken. Now that Lin Xian was dead, there was no one in the world who could defeat them. This was a strong sense of confidence. Even if Lin Xian's hidden trump cards were to be used on someone else, as long as it wasn't Lin Xian himself, it would be difficult to pose a substantial threat to him. Everyone in the Imperial City had already retreated to the space-time hall, their faces filled with excitement. At this moment, he was waving his arms and shouting, "Exterminate the anomalies and show the might of our Imperial City." Lin Yin's expression was also excited. This was a true battle between supreme beings. They could destroy the universe with a raise of their hand. However, at the same time, there were also people who were worried for Lin Yu and the others. After all, they were up against the 10 bizarre kings. They had existed since ancient times and were indestructible throughout the ages. They had been revived in the ancestral land of the bizarre races. After billions of years of recuperation, he had already recovered to his peak state, and his strength had even increased. This was bad news. However, Lin Yin had complete confidence in Lin Yu and the other two. Master has dominated the world unhindered. Now that he possesses supreme battle prowess, he can naturally kill all enemies. Lin Yin muttered, "City Lord Lin, kill the strange creatures." Their expressions were filled with excitement. The battle was in full swing. Half of the sky had already collapsed. At this moment, Lin Yu had already used universe fire and burial ice. It was only now that King Tsang's expression changed slightly. "I know, it was you at the edge of the Ming realm." Ming didn't go deep into the Ming realm back then. At that time, universe fire and burial ice had become violent. Even if he went in, he would inevitably be eroded. Therefore, after seeing universe fire and burial ice calm down, he didn't go in. However, he didn't expect that after Lin Yu was rescued by a mysterious force, he didn't leave the Ming realm. Instead, he refined universe fire and burial ice. It seems like there's a traitor among the anomalies. King Yu guessed at the first moment. If there was no traitor among the anomalies, Lin Yu wouldn't have been able to reach the border of the Ming realm. That was because he needed to pass through the anomalies' ancestral land. With Lin Yu's current state, it was impossible even if he relied on the other two mysterious forces of the ancestral land. Lin Yu didn't answer. Now that King Yu was suspicious, Lin Yu wouldn't let him go for the sake of the Overlord of the Star's grand plan. Universe fire and burial ice appeared below Lin Yu. Endless Tao laws were ignited and then frozen by burial ice, turning into powder. Under the aura of the two divine items, the anomalies began to dissipate and cease to exist. Lin Li used Lin Xian's power. At this moment, the aura of the space-time hall was constantly gathering towards him. Earlier, when he used the space-time hall, he was worried that he would disturb Lin Yu's cultivation. However, now that Lin Yu had broken through to the Overlord level and came to the battlefield, Lin Li no longer had such worries. He began to use the power left behind by Lin Xian. The aura on Lin Li's body was constantly increasing. At this moment, it was almost above King Tsang's. Lin Yu used universe fire and burial ice to trap him. "I'll kill him." Lin Li stood tall and straight. The armor on his body had been restored to its previous state and was shining brightly. The Tao of space-time intertwined on it, revealing an endless amount of power. At this moment, Lin Li had already used his strongest power. He knew how difficult it was to deal with King Yu. If he didn't use his full power, he wouldn't be able to keep him here today. Lin Yu nodded. As Lin Yu's gaze fell, universe fire and burial ice appeared in the void. Like yin and yang, they each took one side and formed a perfect circle. It completely enveloped Lin Li and King Yu's figures within it. Of course, Lin Yu wasn't just watching the battle. At this moment, he held the stone sword in his hand and attacked. He and Lin Li worked together to kill King Yu. Kings don't enter the cycle of reincarnation and live forever. You're an incomplete overlord, a remnant who borrowed Lin Xian's power. How dare you offend me? King Yu reprimanded coldly. Put away your high and mighty attitude. Today, I'll let you accompany your brother, Linli said. He didn't show any mercy and directly revealed the identity of one of the 10 sovereigns that Lin Xian killed back then. Linli's battle armor shone brightly. The space-time laws on it had already materialized and turned into divine chains of order. They circled around his body and imprinted themselves into Linli's battle armor. In the sky, there were only a few blazing figures that were constantly bursting forth with destructive power. Lin Yu and Linli were attacking King Yu together. Although Lin Yu's battle constitution had only broken through to the Overlord realm, his current battle strength wasn't any weaker than King Yu's, who was one of the 10 sovereigns, due to the superposition of space-time. Perhaps it was because King Yu had been born prematurely and had engaged in a great battle with Lin Yu before the strange ancestral land. Until now, his strength had yet to recover to its peak. Because of this, even though King Yu was invincible and undefeatable, he was still suppressed under the siege. The power of Lin Xian's Dao laws back then was too terrifying. Every time he attacked, he seemed to be able to suppress and destroy a living being from its origin. His existence was completely erased from the river of time. Even the 10 sovereigns couldn't withstand this power. This time, the auras on their bodies actually showed signs of weakening. The strange runes on their bodies also dimmed a little. Boom! With a swing of his sword, the entire universe shook. With the support of the runes, Lin Yu broke through the king's restriction around King Yu and almost chopped off his arm. The hideous wound quickly healed. King Yu's expression turned cold. At this moment, he finally felt the pressure. The battle strength displayed by Lin Yu and Linli was not much different from his. If he continued to fight, he might really be killed here. At this place, there was the clay jar, the ancient characters, and the cosmic fire burial ice. Under the 3 overlords, it was possible that they could completely obliterate the true spirits of the 10 sovereigns. Chapter 1377. Your talent is truly shocking. In the end, even King Yu, who had witnessed the rise and fall of many great eras, could not help but sigh. Lin Yu was the most terrifyingly talented person he had ever seen in his life. In this great era, there are probably no other people of your generation who can stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Even Ming Qingtian might not be as good as you, King Yu said. However, your path has come to an end, King Yu continued. He had already unleashed his true killing intent and said, "Today, I will kill you." He would not allow Lin Yu to continue growing. Their former emperor had deduced that there would be variables in the future. At a certain point, everything would be unfathomable. It seemed to have started in this era. King Yu and the others had appeared in order to eliminate all possible factors in advance. Lin Yu had already given them too much shock. Now, even if they had to use all of their strength, they had to kill him. The outcome is still uncertain. Lin Yu was extremely confident. Lin Yu placed his long sword in front of him. With a swipe of his hand, the power of cosmic fire and burial ice was added to the stone sword. Lin Yu was no longer planning to hold back and was about to use his strongest killing move. Currently, only his body had broken through to the highest level. Through the method he had obtained from the strange race, he now possessed the ability to be invulnerable. His body was overflowing with a mystical glow. Although it was very thin, it was as if he was taking a stroll in the park and was not affected in the slightest by King Yu's terrifying web of divine order. With each step, he executed the world's end near at hand and instantly approached King Yu. He swung his sword. The power of cosmic fire and burial ice was crazily surging. Linli was also using all of his strength. However, King Yu had become calm. He had isolated Linli and was determined to kill Lin Yu first. Linli shouted as he broke through the restriction and directly chopped off King Yu's arm. He wanted to stop King Yu from attacking Lin Yu. Although Lin Yu currently possessed supreme battle prowess, he still did not have the corresponding spiritual will and cultivation. If he were to face King Yu alone, it would be difficult for him to obtain victory. However, King Yu had already steeled his heart to kill Lin Yu. The 10 sovereigns were immortal and indestructible. In the blink of an eye, their arms reassembled and became billions of miles long. They grabbed at Lin Yu. The strange substance of the origin filled the air. Lin Yu was fearless and directly used the long sword in his hand to meet the attack head-on. The laws of Tao were being destroyed inch by inch. This was merely the result of the collision between the two of them, but it had already caused such a terrifying phenomenon. At this moment, Linley had also broken through King Yu's blockade and was approaching them with an unstoppable momentum. An unparalleled power suddenly erupted. Lin Yu broke King Yu's arm with the ultimate strength of his body. Then, the two of them charged towards King Yu's main body in the distance. The chaos of time and space permeated the air. It was as if they could return everything to its original state and drag it into the endless abyss. At this moment, King Yu finally could not hold on any longer. The strange runes on his body actually began to dim. They were completely obliterated by the chaos of time and space on Linley's body. However, this was not the end. Lin Yu directly cut open King Yu's body with an endless amount of power. Black blood spilled onto the ground and contaminated some things. However, under the power of the cosmic fire and burial ice, all the black blood evaporated. None of them said a word. They were now in the middle of a battle of life and death. Linley and Lin Yu no longer cared about anything else. They had already gone all out and were using all kinds of techniques. They swore to keep King Yu here. At this moment, the endless cosmic fire finally swallowed King Yu. The aura on his body was constantly being worn down. The space-time law was like a bronze furnace that trapped King Yu, who was trying to break free. The terrifying and strange substance inside started to surge. Even though King Yu's main body was trapped, he could still manifest in the real world. A huge shadow appeared in the sky. It looked exactly like King Yu. At this moment, he opened his mouth and swallowed the sky and the earth. The origin ground was already in a mess. At this moment, a strange glow appeared on Lin Yu and Linley's bodies. It seemed that they could not withstand this power and were about to be swallowed into King Yu's stomach and completely refined. Lin Yu and Linley snorted at the same time. The supreme aura on their bodies directly destroyed King Yu's technique. Then, they formed a complicated seal with both hands. A few ancient characters were imprinted on the bronze furnace formed by the chaos of time and space. At this moment, King Yu's aura was completely suppressed. The expression of the King of Ruins, who was fighting with Emperor Qin Shi Huang in the distance, changed. Now, the invasion team of the strange creatures had lost. All of the strange creatures had been completely eliminated, and King Yu was also trapped. If this battle continued, it was very likely that he would die here. This was because after countless years, Emperor Qin Shi Huang's strength had not weakened at all. On the contrary, he had improved even further. At this moment, he was actually able to suppress King Yu. If this continued, he would repeat the mistakes of ancient history. At this moment, he was already thinking of retreating. King of Ruins, save me. At this moment, King Tsang could no longer care about his face because he felt the threat of death. Under the suppression of several types of power, he could feel his own origin constantly fading away. Moreover, the aura of the strange race's ancestral land had been completely isolated by the clay pot. It was difficult for him to truly receive this power and heal his injuries. Let go of King Yu. King of Ruins roared and charged towards Lin Yu and Linley. Now, Lin Yu and Linley's strength had become extremely weak because of him suppressing King Yu. It was already difficult for them to maintain the bronze furnace. Your opponent is me, Emperor Qin Shi Huang said calmly. Several ancestral dragon phantoms rose from the origin land. They were hundreds of millions of miles long and blocked King of Ruins' path. Moreover, they carried a terrifying power. Roar! The dragon's roar reverberated and shook the world. King of Ruins was blocked. In an instant, cracks appeared on his body. Emperor Qin Shi Huang also showed signs of suppressing King of Ruins. It was a desperate struggle. king of ruins, and king you did not expect that the living beings of the origin ground would still have such terrifying combat power. Moreover, even a mysterious artifact like the clay pot had appeared. King, you might not be able to escape now. Everyone, help me get out. King of Ruins transmitted his voice. The strange race's ancestral land hundreds of millions of miles away shook with King of Ruins' words. Several terrifying bursts of energy erupted from within, and in the blink of an eye, they arrived outside Imperial City. Under the force of these forces, a crack appeared on the seal formed by the clay pot. At this moment, King of Ruins no longer cared about King Yu. He broke free from Emperor Qin Shi suppression and arrived outside the seal. Then, he merged with the black mist of the strange race's ancestral land. He did not continue to attack. Instead, he turned and retreated. I hope that you can withstand the attack of the strange race. When the time comes, it will be the time for all living beings to weep and die, King of Ruins said coldly. After reaching their level, their emotions had become incomparably thin. Seeing that King Yu was being suppressed, he did not hesitate and immediately retreated. He knew that due to the appearance of the clay pot, there was no chance of winning today. Therefore, he gave up on King Yu and fled on his own. Emperor Qin Shi did not stop him. He just watched King of Ruins leave indifferently. His current strength had not fully recovered and could suppress King of Ruins. However, he had merged with the black mist of the strange race's ancestral land. It was impossible to keep him here. He arrived in front of Lin Yu and King of Ruins. His aura erupted. A few ancient characters were added to the bronze cauldron formed by the space-time law. Completely refined King Yu. He only uttered a single sentence. Today, they were going to completely kill King Yu, one of the 10 sovereigns. Chapter 1378. Only 8 of the 10 sovereigns remain, the first emperor said slowly. His tone was cold and dignified. The sovereigns are immortal. Do you think that you can kill me with the help of that broken artifact? King Yu asked coldly. He did not believe that the first emperor and the others could kill him. I am King Yu, one of the 10 sovereigns. I am the most powerful being in the universe. More than 1 or 2 have died by my hands. I have shocked an entire era and witnessed the decline of many great eras. King Yu continued to resist. The strange aura on his body almost seeped out of the bronze cauldron. Even now, the power on his body was still powerful and blazing. The 10 sovereigns were too powerful. As the most powerful beings born from the strange race since ancient times, they were protected by the strange ancestral land and were indestructible. Even now, strange phenomena were still occurring in the strange ancestral land. An unknown and unspeakable aura was constantly descending here, preventing the first emperor and the others from killing it. However, the distance between them was still too great. This was also the reason why the first emperor came here. He wanted to protect Lin Yu and use the clay jar on Lin Yu to try and suppress 1 or 2 sovereigns. Now, he had achieved his goal. Under the power of the clay jar, the strange aura could no longer invade the ancestral land. King Yu's death was a foregone conclusion. However, King Yu did not seem to be afraid now. The first emperor also realized this. The supreme aura here had lasted for 1,000 years. The 10 sovereigns were too difficult to kill. Even the first emperor, Lin Li, and Lin Yu had to spend 1,000 years before they were able to completely obliterate them. Suddenly, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled in the direction of the strange race's ancestral land. The ancestral land was constantly shaking. Black rain fell outside the imperial city. This indicated that a sovereign had completely fallen and turned into dust and ashes. Now that the aura of the strange ancestral land was approaching, it was difficult to condense his body here. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. The first emperor and the others actually managed to kill another sovereign in the current era. This was undoubtedly great news. Even Tian, Yi, and the others who were in the ancient city could not help but feel agitated. They saw hope for the future. King Yu had passed away. The strange phenomenon of heaven and earth foretold this result. However, the first emperor's eyes didn't show the slightest hint of relief. King Yu's aura seems to be incomplete after arriving here. The first emperor voiced his doubts. In other words, King Yu didn't come here with his full body. Instead, he left behind a final trump card and is still inside the strange ancestral land. Lin Yu frowned slightly. Back then, Lin Xian had killed King Yu's younger brother. This caused them to be on guard. Therefore, King Yu left behind a method to revive himself in the ancestral land, which allowed him to reach this place. At this moment, Lin Li also realized why the King of Ruins would give up on King Yu and flee on his own. But even so, a large portion of King Yu's origin must have been severed. Even in the final battle, it would be hard for him to recover, Lin Li said. His aura gradually dissipated as he returned to the space-time Great Hall. The aura on his body became very weak, and decaying cracks appeared on his face. It was almost irreversible. Now he was about to die. Before history, he should have been a dead man. It was only because of Lin Xian that Lin Li was able to survive until now. Now that he had borrowed Lin Xian's power, it was difficult for him to hide the injuries on his body. At this moment, he was in the process of becoming a Dalmorph. Lin Li's face, however, was extremely calm. It's fine. As long as Lin Zigao's method isn't completely exhausted, I won't die, Lin Li said to Lin Yu, who had a worried look on his face. He wasn't lying. As long as the power left behind by Lin Xian in the space-time Great Hall was not completely exhausted, he wouldn't die. You actually survived until now. Why don't you go and witness the final battle? Lin Li laughed. I still want to kill a few sovereigns, Lin Li said slowly. This time they succeeded. In the future, King Yu had already lost his ability to fight. But later on, there were simply too few top-notch fighters in the universe. Currently, the only known one was the first emperor. There's no need for you to be disappointed. Back then, Lin Xian and the others had plotted for eternity. In the final battle, they will appear. The first emperor said. After dealing with King Yu, he did not linger in the imperial city. Instead, he returned to the ancient city. The great battle had calmed down for the time being. The imperial city had suffered heavy losses. More than half of the casualties had died. Lin Yu felt helpless about this as well. Even though he could use the power of the God King's badge to heal his injuries quickly, it was far too difficult to revive a living being. The living beings of the world were the most mysterious existences in the universe. Even the utmost beings had not transcended life and death. In the end, they could not escape the fate of death. Everyone in the imperial city did not die. Even though their eyes were filled with sadness, they were all searching for the corpses of their loved ones. This is the great battle. It represents blood and tears. Lin Yu stood before everyone and said slowly. Even though he couldn't bear it in his heart, the truth was right in front of him. Sadness could no longer solve any problems. Furthermore, in the final battle, there would definitely be countless living beings who would die because of it. They would leave this world forever. This is just the beginning of the great battle. If it truly comes to the final battle, the entire imperial city might cease to exist. Are all of you prepared? Lin Yu looked at everyone with a calm expression. He wasn't lying in the slightest. This was the cruelty of the final battle. After learning about the great battle before the ancient history, Lin Yu knew that the final battle couldn't be resolved by a single person. It required the combined strength of all living beings. Only then would they be able to protect their home. We're all prepared. Lin Yin reared his head and roared into the skies. He had already taken his revenge. However, he had yet to take care of the mysterious beings. At this moment, his voice was powerful and resonant. It infected everyone here. Under the power of Lin Yu's God King's badge, all of the injuries on his body had already healed up. At this moment, his eyes were filled with battle intent. His body pierced through the universe. Everyone's hearts were shaken. They were all of the most exalted bloodlines. How could they be afraid of the mysterious beings? In this great battle, they had already displayed their full power. In fact, some of them didn't even leave behind a corpse. In the final moments of their lives, they had ignited their own quintessence, dragging several of the mysterious beings with them as they threw themselves into cosmic fire and burial ice. We of the Imperial City never shrink from a battle. At this moment, someone spoke out in an impassioned voice. In her arms, there was an infant in swaddling clothes. Her husband had already perished forever in this battle. Not even his corpse was left behind. That woman wasn't sad at all. Tears of blood could be seen in her eyes as she spoke out in an impassioned voice. We of the Imperial City never shrink from a battle. Never shrink from a battle. Kill all the mysterious beings. Bring peace to all of us. Everyone called out in a loud voice. The entire Imperial City was shaken by their cries. Linyu looked at everyone, his gaze calm. Linley nodded, feeling very gratified. Not only did he approve of the people of the Imperial City, but he was also satisfied with Linyu. Over the years, Linyu's growth was something that even Linley, who had witnessed the great era before ancient history, couldn't help but be shocked. Linyu's talent was something that he had never seen before since ancient times. If he was given time to grow, he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with First Ancestor, perhaps even surpass him. At this moment, Linyu had his hands behind his back. The people of the Imperial City began to clean up the mess. Linley and Linyu arrived at the small courtyard. However, at this moment, there was a hint of worry in their eyes. Chapter 1379. Right now, Linyu already possessed supreme combat strength. However, the great battle was approaching. It was far from enough for him to merely possess supreme combat strength. At the same time, the clay jar that he possessed was way too damaged. There was only half of it left, and it was hard for its true might to be unleashed. It would be extremely difficult to kill the 10 thrones just by relying on this damaged artifact. The thrones of the strange world were indestructible. Without the clay jar and the ancient words, it would be extremely difficult to kill them. This was something that Linyu was worried about. He took out the clay jar and looked at the ancient cracks that were intertwined on it. Has this artifact been damaged since the beginning of time? Linyu said slowly. Although he had learned from the founding emperor that the utmost beings of the past had laid out their plans, Linyu did not have much confidence in the revival of the 10 thrones of the future and the emperors behind them. Forget about the countless strange world living beings who would be able to go against that one and only emperor. The appearance of the 10 thrones had already caused the collapse of all living beings in the universe. It was hard to imagine who would be able to go against that one emperor. You don't have to worry about that. That emperor of the strange world doesn't seem to be a living being. Even in that battle in the ancient history, he did not manifest. Linley said, perhaps that emperor is the source of the strange world race's birth. Right now, he is buried in the strange world ancestral ground and might have died long ago. Linley voiced out his guess. That was because back then, Lin Xian had entered the strange world ancestral ground and returned to the 12 universes. Linley had some understanding of what had happened in the ancestral ground. At this moment, he said to Linyu. As he died, Linyu looked into the distance. Even so, he still could not let his guard down. However, I heard Lin Zhigao mention that the emperor might just be the remnant of some living being. Perhaps he has already left the Tao severing state. Linley said, the Tao severing state was the utmost being. There were a total of 9 heavens. Linley was now talking about the division of the Tao severing state. There was a huge difference between each heaven. Back then, Lin Xian had already reached the 9th level of Tao severing. However, in the end, he did not give up some things. Therefore, he did not break through. In the final battle, he was still at the peak of the 9th heavenly layer. This was also the reason why they did not return safely after entering the ancestral land. When Linley said this, a hint of sadness appeared in his eyes. Back then, Lin Xian had shouldered too much, because within the 12 universes, he was the only utmost being. Among his followers, the strongest one was only at half-step utmost being pinnacle, and had yet to break through. Otherwise, in the final move, Lin Xian would have to deal with countless enemies, and it would be difficult for him to extricate himself. Unfortunately, We didn't work hard enough. Linley said. He hated himself for not being able to help Lin Xian in the final battle. Unfortunately, at that time, Linley was simply too young. If he was given a little more time, he would definitely be able to break through to the highest realm. However, an era killed a prodigy. The environment of that great era no longer allowed him to break through. This was also a pity. Linley's talent was not any weaker than that of the top prodigies of the current era. Otherwise, Lin Xian would not have thought highly of him and sealed his life source energy, leaving it behind in the current era for the sake of opening up a sliver of hope for the future. This isn't your fault, Elder Lin. Lin Yu shook his head. That's true. The past is in the past. Even if I can't let it go, I can't bear any regrets in the great war of the future and fight to my heart's content. Linley shook his head bitterly. He looked at Lin Yu. His eyes were filled with endless hope. He seemed to be able to see the shadow of Lin Xian in Lin Yu. Lin Yu did not mind this in the slightest. However, the problem he had to think about right now was how to increase his strength quickly, as well as how to collect the pottery jar. These were the two most important problems right now. If the pottery jar really is that item, I might know where the other parts are. Linley said. Right now, there was no other way. This was because he did not know if the pottery jar was the item that Lin Xian and the others had brought out from the ancestral land. After a long discussion, Lin Yu came to the ancient city alone. However, he did not care about the residents of the ancient city. Instead, he headed straight for the ancestral land. He wanted to verify some things with the first emperor. Outside the ancient city, no one dared to stop Lin Yu. They could only let him enter freely. Lin Yu now possessed supreme battle strength. In the previous battle, he had joined forces to kill King Yu, one of the 10 sovereigns. This was an event that could be considered a great achievement in ancient history. Everyone was filled with respect for him. However, in the end, they had lost this powerful battle force. This was all because the living beings in the ancient city had ostracized Lin Yu. This had been the case from the very beginning. Lin Yu had already shown them great kindness by not denouncing all of them. At this moment, Yu had a veil covering her face. One could clearly see that her beautiful red phoenix eyes had lost their luster. Because of a wrong decision, the ancient city had missed out on a top powerhouse. The old monsters came out of seclusion early and came to Lin Yu. They were no longer high and mighty. However, Lin Yu did not care about these people. Instead, he went straight to the first emperor's residence. There were many deep pits outside. Countless bronze statues were buried in them. Their bodies were filled with unparalleled battle intent. It was as if they were about to revive. Lin Yu sensed the aura of people who had passed away from the bronze statues. These seemed to be people who had died in the great battle in ancient history. In the end, they were refined into bronze statues. They were like puppets that could unleash their battle strength in the future. Come in. At this moment, the first emperor's voice came from the depths of the huge palace. Lin Yu stepped onto the huge bronze steps. He came to the first emperor's palace. There was only the first emperor here. He was sitting on the throne with his head propped up. He was filled with endless majesty. There was no one in the palace. It was strangely lonely. One could see that there was a strange substance floating in it. The first emperor had been comprehending and studying this substance all this time. Among them, there was an incomplete true spirit that was howling faintly. These are the warriors who fought with me in the past. They have all passed away now, the first emperor said slowly. There was not the slightest bit of emotion in his eyes. Lin Yu also knew that the bronze statues outside were battle puppets refined from the true spirits and bodies of the soldiers in the past. Now, in the palace, there were the incomplete consciousness and true spirits of these people. However, it was obvious that the incomplete true spirits of these soldiers had been contaminated by the strange substance. Even the first emperor could not get rid of it completely. In the end, he had no choice but to cut off the contaminated parts and refine the remaining parts into puppets. This meant that these soldiers would never be able to reincarnate or revive. They no longer had their own consciousness. They could only be reduced to tools for battle. The people before ancient history had sacrificed too much, are you here to find the secret of the clay jar? The first emperor asked slowly. That's right. Lin Yu nodded. At this point, Lin Yu did not beat around the bush. He asked directly, I want to know if the clay jar is an artifact that the ancestors of the past brought out from the strange ancestral territory. No, the first emperor said directly. The clay jar you are holding now is an artifact that the 10 great monster kings brought out from the depths of the realm sea before they were sealed. It was then left behind in the universe, the first emperor said. Obviously, Lin Yu did not expect this answer. This was unexpected. He had always thought that the clay jar had a natural restraining effect on the strange race. It should have been brought out from the strange ancestral territory. Now, it seemed that there was a huge secret. Chapter 1380. Could it be that the thing that the 10 great monster kings once fought against in the depths of the realm sea is on the opposite side of the strange race? Lin Yu couldn't help but guess. This was because the clay jar had a natural restraining effect on the strange race. Moreover, it was brought out from the realm sea by the 10 great monster kings. This was the only explanation that made sense. The first emperor shook his head and said, On the contrary, the clay jar and the strange race have a great relationship. It can even be said that they come from the same source. Lin Yu didn't understand. He had always thought that the thing that the 10 great monster kings once fought against had nothing to do with the strange race. Now, it seemed that he was wrong. The birth of the strange race originated from an artifact. This artifact has long been lost in ancient history. It is very likely that it is in the 12 universes. This is also the main reason why the strange race started the war. They want to find the origin ancient artifact. The first emperor said slowly. Now, the reason for the war between the universe and the strange race had finally surfaced. It's just that no one knows what this artifact looks like. The first emperor shook his head and said, The strange race wanted to find that artifact after the destruction of the sacred land and the universe. Lin Yu fell into deep thought and said, If that's the case, can we find the origin ancient artifact through the clay jar? It should be possible. The first emperor said a shocking fact. The clay jar might be another origin ancient artifact. This was also one of the main reasons why the few sovereigns that Lin Yu encountered were moved when they saw the clay jar. Now that the clay jar had been exposed, they might have to start the final war in advance in order to find the origin ancient artifact of the strange race. The clay jar was originally incomplete? Lin Yu voiced his guess. After he obtained the clay jar, he obtained the location of the other fragments. When he was in the universe, he had already collected the other fragments. As for the remaining fragments, there was no news. Perhaps only the 10 great monster kings know about this, the first emperor said. This was also the reason why Lin Yu could use the clay jar's power to remove the seal of the 10 great monster kings. It seems that returning to the universe is inevitable, Lin Yu said. Within the cosmos, there are still the creations left behind by the utmost beings. Perhaps you might be able to make use of them to truly break through to the utmost state. The founding emperor did not hide anything. In the current world, there were simply too few supreme experts. Now, Lin Yu was the only one who had broken through this step. Due to the urgency of the situation, they had no choice but to let Lin Yu achieve a breakthrough as soon as possible. Only then would he be able to play a huge role in the final battle. Hold on to this artifact. Return to the universe and go to Earth. As the first emperor spoke, he waved his sleeves, and a decree appeared in Lin Yu's hand. This is the reincarnation decree. It can revive all the reincarnators on Earth and bring them to the place of origin ahead of time. This was one of the methods left behind by the utmost being. This was to prevent any accidents from happening. Lin Yu looked at the reincarnation decree. Within his eyes, there was a familiar aura. This decree was akin to a piece of decaying paper. There were mysterious patterns imprinted on it. Even though Lin Yu already possessed an utmost being's fighting strength, it was still hard for him to comprehend it completely. He could not decipher the contents written on it. However, Lin Yu had seen this piece of paper before. Within that stone city in the world sea, there were true spirits of living beings. They had made use of this piece of paper to enter the cycle of reincarnation. Lin Yu had not expected that this piece of paper would possess such godly powers. I believe you must have seen that stone city by now. The founding emperor continued. This piece of paper is something that the utmost beings of the past had used their powers to snatch from that ancient city. However, they had to pay a huge price for it. Right now, Lin Yu already possessed an utmost being's fighting strength. It was time for him to understand these things. However, this had Lin Yu somewhat taken aback. That was because he had stayed within that ancient city for a long time. He had not known that this piece of paper would be this horrifying. Even the utmost beings of the past had to pay a huge price just to snatch a piece of paper from the ancient city. Lin Yu kept this reincarnation decree properly with a solemn expression. At the same time, he was guessing where this stone city came from and what sort of powers it possessed. This was the reason why the utmost beings of the past were so solemn. Eventually, they even made use of the ancient city to build Earth. This was the land of reincarnation. This was the reason why the powerful beings of the past could have a chance of reviving in the future. Even the founding emperor did not know much about the mysteries of the ancient city. Therefore, he could only inform Lin Yu of these matters. After understanding everything from the founding emperor, Lin Yu returned to the emperor's city. After informing him of everything, he was prepared to head to the 12 universes immediately to complete his preparations for the final battle. Right now, he already possessed an utmost being's fighting strength. However, he only spent a few years before arriving at the Immortal Pass. Little brother Lin, long time no see. Revered Ming appeared. With a smile on his face, he welcomed Lin Yu into the city. However, when he sensed Lin Yu's aura, he was incomparably shocked. Your current cultivation state. Revered Ming was speechless. Right now, when he looked at Lin Yu, it was as though he was looking at the heavens. Everything was blurry and unknown. This was definitely different from when he first met Lin Yu. He could not see through Lin Yu's cultivation state at all. Right now, the faintly discernible aura that was being emitted from Lin Yu's body was causing him to feel fear instinctively, as though it was unattainable. I'm lucky to possess an utmost being's fighting strength, Lin Yu replied. SSSSS. The moment Revered Ming heard Lin Yu's calm reply, he could not help but take in a deep breath of cold air. It had only been a few years since they last met, and Lin Yu had already broken through to an utmost being state. Not utmost being. I merely possess the fighting strength of an utmost being, that's all, Lin Yu explained. However, even so, Revered Ming was still unable to calm down for a long time. The word utmost being, naturally, it went without saying what it meant. It meant that it was an invincible existence in the heavens and earth. It had already transcended, and even the Tao of the heavens and earth could no longer restrict it. Brother Lin, your innate potential is truly unparalleled throughout the ages. Revered Ming felt his mouth dry up, and for a moment, he did not know what to say. Lin Yu clasped his hands together. Has Big Brother Lu not returned yet? Lin Yu asked in concern. Revered Ming sighed and shook his head. I wonder how Ancestor Lu is right now. Right now, Lin Yu had already grasped all 9 ancient characters. Under the power of the ancient characters, Lin Yu came to the ancient bridge, wanting to deduce how Ancestor Lu was doing right now. However, he could only see a blurry figure that seemed to be moving forward with difficulty. Even though Lin Yu did not know the exact situation of Ancestor Lu, by the looks of it, Ancestor Lu should not be in any danger. Combining his connection with the origin fire, he knew that Ancestor Lu seemed to be nearing the depths. Chapter 1381. Ming Tianzuan was beside him. When he heard Lin Yu's explanation, he was slightly relieved. I wonder why Brother Lin came to the Immortal Pass. Ming Tianzuan asked slowly. Lin Yu replied directly. I want to borrow the ancient road of the first universe to return to the universe and complete a few major matters. Ming Tianzuan didn't say much and directly handed the map to Lin Yu. Lin Yu nodded. However, the return journey is very dangerous. You have to be very careful, Ming Tianzuan reminded. However, Lin Yu already had supreme combat strength. He could easily resolve the dangers in the Realm Sea. Apart from those strange and unknown things, Lin Yu knew that there was nothing that could threaten him now. Ming, Tianzu nodded. Lin Yu didn't stop. He directly came to the edge of the Realm Sea, in the other direction of the plank road, and stepped on the return journey. Tens of thousands of years had passed. Lin Yu didn't know what the current 12 universes were like. The Realm Sea was still boundless. However, the aura on it couldn't suppress Lin Yu too much. Even a speck of dust was a world. However, Lin Yu still had an unfathomable feeling when he looked into the distance of the Realm Sea. The Realm Sea was too mysterious. Since ancient times, no one knew its specific origins. This was undoubtedly extremely terrifying. Lin Yu wanted to go and find the burial master. If he could make a move, the hope of all living beings in the universe would undoubtedly be much greater. However, he was already disappointed in all living beings. If he went to find him now, he might not make a move. Now, he could only go to Earth and let the experts in reincarnation revive in advance. They would come to the land of origin, and after a few years of recuperation, they would launch the final battle. Life and death, he could only rely on these known combat strength. After an unknown amount of time, the Realm Sea seemed to have no end. Lin Yu spent thousands of years traveling from the universe to the land of origin. In the end, he had to use the Stone City to take a shortcut. Right now, Lin Yu's strength could no longer be mentioned in the same breath as before. Even though he had yet to grasp the Tao laws of the utmost, for a powerful being like him, the distance between them was just a single thought. It was enough to see just how vast the Realm Sea was. 100 years passed. Lin Yu seemed to have arrived at the center of the Realm Sea. One could see that there were broken limbs everywhere. There were even some decaying bodies that were much larger than stars. However, under the corrosion of the Realm Sea, even if these skeletons were extremely powerful when they were alive, now they were still close to decaying. Lin Yu frowned. These creatures didn't belong to the universe or the strange races. Their origins were mysterious, and he had no idea where they came from. Could it be that there was a bit of time before ancient history, that there were powerful existences? Lin Yu couldn't help but think. Before ancient history, perhaps it wasn't the starting point of everything in the world. Instead, there was a period of time before that where there were powerful existences. That was the only explanation that made sense. However, Lin Yu didn't stop here. Under the passage of time, even if there were no lack of skeletons with supreme combat strength, their auras had already been corroded by the power of the Realm Sea. Now, there wasn't the slightest bit of divine force. Even if Lin Yu wanted to salvage them now, it would be useless. During this time, Lin Yu crossed an extremely long stretch of fog, almost getting lost inside. That blue fog was extremely strange. When Lin Yu came out, there seemed to be a faintly discernible flute sound in front of him. It was distant and long, seemingly carrying a hint of death. Lin Yu saw a black dot appear above the Realm Sea. When he got closer and saw it, it turned out to be a floating turtle shell. However, it was clear that the owner of this turtle shell had long passed away, turning white. The source of the flute sound was here. Lin Yu arrived on the turtle shell. The turtle shell had always been drifting around with the waves of the Realm Sea. There was no end, no beginning or end. The turtle shell was 100 feet in size. There was a sparkling and translucent skeleton at the center. Even now, it still carried a powerful aura. The clothes on its body hadn't decayed yet. After Lin Yu ascended the turtle shell, the flute sound here stopped. Lin Yu looked at the corpse sitting in front of him. There were several lines of words written, extremely ancient. However, Lin Yu recognized that this came from the era before ancient history. I'm the 5th universe's Fairy Guyu. Today, I pursued Lin Xian's footsteps and mistakenly entered the dangerous land of the Realm Sea. I know that there is no hope for survival, so I left behind a letter, hoping that the future generations who see my skeleton can bring it back to the 5th universe. Lin Xian, Big Brother Lin, I already can't find you. Can't wait for you to come. The final engraving was clearly already in disorder. Perhaps at that time, it was his true emotions that were revealed. Lin Yu's expression was solemn. This was also an expert who pursued the footsteps of his first ancestor in the future and died in the Realm Sea. She was worthy of respect. Fairy Guyu's cultivation had already reached half-step utmost being when she was alive. However, she still died in the Realm Sea by accident. While the Realm Sea was terrifying, Lin Yu also felt regret for Fairy Guyu. She had been lost in the Realm Sea for too long, so much so that she didn't even know that the battle in ancient history had ended. She still hoped that Lin Xian could come to the Realm Sea and bring her out so that she could accompany him. Lin Yu bowed slightly towards the skeleton. Then, he kept the turtle shell and the skeleton into his inner world. Time killed geniuses. Fairy Guyu was also a stunning figure of that era. However, because of her admiration and love for Lin Xian, she died in the Realm Sea in the end. How sorrowful and desolate was this? That era was too tragic. There were more than one or two people like Fairy Guyu. The utmost beings had flesh and blood as well. However, for the sake of the masses, they had all given up on their little love. Just like the utmost beings of the stars, their beauties had passed away and they had fallen into eternal darkness. In the end, it was hard to even see them for the last time, a regret that was left behind for eternity. After Lin Yu witnessed all of this, he didn't want to leave any regrets in his heart. He thought of the words that Tao Master Burial had said. If that time really came, Lin Yu and his close friends and family, where would they go? This was the reason why Lin Yu had always wanted to be strong. Right now, after witnessing the deeds of the utmost beings, his heart had already changed. This change was very secretive. Even Lin Yu himself didn't know about it. Lin Yu's temperament was so resolute that there was nothing in this world that could affect him. This was the path that he had chosen himself. Naturally, he had no regrets. In the blink of an eye, another 100 years had passed. Even though the Realm Sea was mysterious and filled with danger, with Lin Yu's current strength, there wasn't much danger. The waves in front of him gradually started to surge. Lin Yu had already sensed the aura of the first Tao law of the universe. The black city wall in front of him stood at the end, emitting a faint radiance. The body of the Taoist priest of guidance stood in front of him. It was preventing the Realm Sea from corroding the first universe. Lin Yu leaped out and arrived at the city wall. However, at this moment he saw some clues. There seemed to be some problems with the Taoist priest of guidance. At this moment, the aura of reincarnation was revealed. So, the Taoist priest of guidance is also an awakened reincarnator. Lin Yu thought of the ancient heavenly court outside of Earth. Back then, was it built by some reincarnators? However, the Taoist priest of guidance had another aura on him. It seemed to come from the same source as the strange matter. However, it was different. Is this the thing that was suppressed at the end of the plank road by the first universe? Lin Yu said slowly. Previously, his cultivation realm was too low and it was hard for him to sense this aura. Now that he had returned, he could see some clues. However, the Taoist priest of guidance seemed to have fused together with this matter. There was no distinction between them. It was this power that was supporting the wisp of his true spirit, preventing it from dissipating completely. It was still guarding this place. However, in order to avoid any accidents, Lin Yu still left some measures on the city wall to prevent the Taoist priest of guidance from falling into it and becoming a member of the Black Calamity. Chapter 1382. After he was done, Lin Yu came to the first universe. However, he didn't stay in the incipient world. Instead, he went to Earth. It was still the same here. However, the reincarnation aura was getting thicker and thicker. It was almost to the point where it couldn't be dispersed. The whole Earth was completely shrouded in a mysterious white fog, and everything became undetectable. Lin Yu was now several times stronger than before he came here. However, the reincarnation aura here still made Lin Yu feel threatened. "You're here." Bai Qi appeared. He stood on the city gate and looked at Lin Yu. Bai Qi's expression changed. "You have the aura of the first emperor on you." Have you met the first emperor? Bai Qi was shocked. Lin Yu nodded slightly and said, I came to the land of reincarnation this time to complete the task that the first emperor entrusted me with. He said directly, Bai Qi was once the first emperor's confidant. Due to the changes on Earth, his strength had reached the emperor realm. Lin Yu knew that Bai Qi was also a reincarnator. He was supposed to follow the first emperor into battle. However, in order to guard the land of reincarnation, he stayed here. I see. Seems like I'm going to embark on the journey soon. Although Bai Qi didn't awaken the memories of his previous life, the first emperor had mentioned it to him. Therefore, when Lin Yu came outside of Earth again, he already knew some things. At this moment, he slowly opened the gate of the city gate. The reincarnation aura rushed over. After Lin Yu stepped in, the aura of the land of reincarnation started to corrode his physical body. However, he was at the utmost realm now. Therefore, it didn't affect him much. However, this was after all a place created by many powerful utmost beings. It was a place that imitated that unknown stone city. At this moment, Lin Yu's figure suddenly became illusory. Gradually, it split into 3 figures with different auras. Upon closer inspection, the 3 figures of Lin Yu looked exactly the same. It was only in terms of aura and disposition that they were different. Lin Yu's 3 lives Tao fruit was affected by the land of reincarnation. At this moment, it seemed to be awakening on its own. Lin Yu stood quietly at the end of the earth. 3 figures that looked exactly the same were looking down at the ground. It carried with it a sense of boundless emptiness. At this moment, Lin Yu's 3-era Tao fruit seemed to have regained its consciousness and was constantly emitting its aura. Lin Yu's main body was on the verge of collapsing. If it weren't for his supreme constitution, he might have already died from the auras. Lin Yu used the power of his inner world to return the 3 lives Tao fruit to it. However, there was a power that shocked Lin Yu. It was the manifestation of his Tao fruit in this life. A string of prayer beads appeared on the wrist of the present world Tao fruit beside Lin Yu. It was communicating with the reincarnation aura here. Lin Yu suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't know that this string of prayer beads came from Shicheng. He had once seen the road of reincarnation and absorbed the same paper as the decree of reincarnation and condensed it into an artifact. At this time, it was exuding a terrifying aura. Even Lin Yu felt a trace of fear at this moment. It was as if he couldn't withstand the power of the Tao law, and his body was about to enter the cycle of reincarnation and be reborn. This is my Tao fruit. Even if I don't know where you came from, you'd better behave in my body, Lin Yu said coldly. He reached out with his Tao fruit of the present world and pressed his palm on the moving prayer beads. Lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Even the ocean was almost evaporated under his aura. Mountains collapsed and the earth cracked. The reincarnation aura had already appeared on Earth, and the terrain was firm and immortal. However, under Lin Yu's aura, the entire Earth was shaking. Mountains and rivers were constantly collapsing. However, this phenomenon only lasted for a while. It was soon suppressed by Lin Yu. Today's Earth had entered a golden age, and many cultivators had risen to prominence. It could be seen that there were many people flying on their swords in the sky. They were watching this terrifying scene from above. They didn't know what was going on and could only watch from afar. Even the weaker ones couldn't withstand this supreme pressure and knelt on the ground. The tall buildings were still the same. The Tao law of Earth seemed to know that this was the last era of reincarnation. After the end of the age of Dharma, the Golden Age immediately began. Countless powerhouses were born and began to rise rapidly. Lin Yu looked at this scene. He felt the oppressive aura of Earth. The decree appeared in his hand. Powerhouses of the reincarnation of the heavens. Time is long and the world is vast. Now that the Black Calamity is approaching, all living beings need you to revive again and go to the land of origin to fight. Lin Yu's words were sonorous and powerful. At this moment, they were like the original heavenly path of Earth. The wind and clouds were throbbing, and endless chaotic lightning was surging. The decree in Lin Yu's hand entered the Tao law of Earth and formed divine chains of order. In the end, the entire earth was enveloped by this aura. All the reincarnation aura was absorbed by the reincarnation decree. Divine chains appeared and communicated with heaven and earth. The world changed greatly. At this moment, some people who were cultivating slowly opened their eyes. They seemed to have sensed something and slowly looked up at the sky. Their origin seemed to be throbbing with the appearance of the reincarnation decree. At the same time, they felt a calling. The appearance of the reincarnation decree made some reincarnators sense it. Chapter 1383. Lin Yu's appearance had undoubtedly caused an uproar. At this moment, countless people were watching. In the end, it even alerted the people of the Divine King Palace. At this moment, a young man blocked Lin Yu's path and said, "Please come with us." His attitude was very polite. However, they were still suspicious of Lin Yu's appearance. It was very easy for cultivators to disguise themselves. However, it was obvious that Lin Yu did not use any disguise technique. Under the reflection of the mirror, this was Lin Yu's original appearance. This had already caused a stir. They could not help but wonder if it was because the son of the young divine king had left behind outside, and now he had come to find them. Because both of them had the same temperament. There was no mistake about it. Just when the place was surrounded by people and not even a drop of water could trickle through, a young child appeared here. He walked out of the restaurant and casually held a drumstick. However, when he saw the street, he said slowly, "What happened?" Reporting to the saint. A person who looks similar to the young divine king has appeared in the city of divine kings. Now, the divine king palace is investigating. Someone beside the young child bowed respectfully and said, "Oh." The young child entered the crowd with suspicion. He did not put on any airs. However, when everyone saw the young child, they took the initiative to open up a path. This person's identity was so high that it was frightening. Even a young divine king had to call him uncle. His strength was unimaginable. At this moment, his appearance had shocked everyone. However, when the young child came to the scene, he stood on the spot in a daze. Even the drumstick in his hand had unknowingly fallen to the ground. Everyone could feel the intense fluctuation of emotions. They were almost unable to bear it and retreated continuously. This was the result of the young child restraining himself. Otherwise, with his emotions, all the living beings here would explode and turn into dust, disappearing forever. Lin Jianyu, long time no see. Lin Yu had a smile on his face. "Big brother, you're back." This young child was Lin Jianyu. At this moment, there was not much change from before. Everyone was incomparably shocked. They were not fools. This person who looked similar to the young divine king dared to directly call the sage by his name. That also meant that, moreover, the sage also called him Big Brother. Lin Yu's identity was already self-evident. This person had disappeared for tens of thousands of years and had now returned. He was the true God King of the 12 universes, Lin Yu. Everyone was filled with fear and respect as they immediately knelt on the ground. "Greetings, godly king. Welcome back, deity king." Just now, some people were still gossiping, guessing that Lin Yu might be the descendant of the young divine king outside. What he didn't expect at all was that it was the young godly king's father, the godly king of the 12 universes. In that case, their words just now were undoubtedly treasonous. At this moment, there were already people who were kneeling on the ground and denouncing him. However, Lin Yu did not punish them. "The current development of the 12 universes has exceeded my imagination." Lin Yu nodded with satisfaction. At this moment, Lin Jianyu, who was standing beside him, was also emotional. Their figures became illusory and directly disappeared on the spot. "Little Lin will be happy to see you," Lin Jianyu said. His eyes were strange as he looked at Lin Yu. Little Lin. Lin Yu was looking forward to it. Although he had already sensed that there was a familiar yet strange aura in the godly king's palace. However, he was looking forward to it. What did his son, the young divine king of the 12 universes, look like? Did he look like the Jade Pure Goddess? His personality is similar to yours, Lin Jianyu said. As they spoke, Lin Yu and Lin Jianyu had already arrived at the Godly King's palace. At this moment, Lin Jianyu's divine consciousness had already transmitted to every place here. People appeared one after another. They all had excited expressions on their faces. First was Qin Wenyan, whose hair was already white. Obviously, because of the development of the 12 universes, he had spent a lot of energy. At this moment, he was mentally and physically exhausted, which caused his hair to turn white. However, there was a deep look in his eyes. Now, he had almost begun to retire, handing over the management of the 12 universes to Lin Yu's son, Little Lin, whom Lin Jianyu spoke of. At this moment, a young man dressed in white appeared in the main hall. His eyebrows were sharp and his eyes were bright. He had a handsome figure, and his black hair was tied up with a jade hairpin. He had a cold aura. Without a doubt, he had perfectly inherited the looks of Lin Yu and the Jade Pure Goddess. Standing there was a feeling that no one in the world deserved to be dressed in white. At this moment, he was with the Jade Pure Goddess and the others. He had heard Lin Jianyu's divine consciousness, and now he had come here. Divine King Lin. The Jade Pure Goddess and Qin Yi were stunned at first, then they revealed smiles. At this moment, the young man was puzzled. In all these years, he had never seen his mother and Lil Miss as happy as they were now. When he saw the person in front of him, he was stunned. He was also stunned on the spot, as the feeling of being connected to his bloodline overwhelmed him. This familiar yet strange feeling gave birth to a special feeling in the young man's heart. "You are father?" The young man looked at Lin Yu with uncertainty. "I didn't expect you to have grown so big," Lin Yu said slowly with a smile. His eyes were filled with relief. The young man's cultivation had reached the half-step ancestor realm, and it seemed that he could break through at any time. He had been in seclusion before. Everyone was extremely happy when they arrived at the main hall. Lin Yu had been away for 10,000 years. Now that he had returned, everyone breathed a sigh of relief and rejoiced. Now that Lin Yu had returned, he must be even stronger. The grand tournament of the universe that happens once in 1,000 years is about to begin. Why don't we hold a grand event after the tournament? Qin Wenyan said. Qin Ji nodded. Everyone expressed their agreement. A month later, it would be time for the grand tournament. Half a month before that, the great sun Boundless Buddha and the others from other universes would arrive in advance. At that time, everyone would gather to congratulate Lin Yu on his return. Okay, Lin Yu nodded. At this time, everyone in the city of God Kings knew about the return of the God King. They all knelt on the ground and paid their respects. Endless power of faith appeared in the God King's palace. As the current God King of the 12 universes, Lin Yu had always existed in legends. His deeds were recorded in books and became a must-read book for all living beings in the universe. Lin Yu had absolute majesty, overthrowing the six-winged God King, resisting the invasion of the 10th universe, being neither servile nor overbearing in the grand tournament of the universe, suppressing the other universes. His deeds were known by all living beings in the 12 universes. Over the years, the God King's palace had gathered endless power of faith. It had almost turned into substance and hovered in the sky. Lin Yu looked at this scene. With a big wave of his hand, endless Tao laws appeared. He gathered everyone's power of faith and slowly condensed a clone to protect the living beings in the universe. This was another great achievement. Everyone knelt on the ground and thanked him. After a small gathering, Lin Yu and the relatives of the Yuqing goddess returned to the courtyard of the God King's palace. Chapter 1384. Lin Yu looked at his son with a smile. Little Lin's growth had obviously exceeded his expectations. In terms of talent, even when he was young, he couldn't compare to him. "What's your name?" Lin Yu and the others came to the pavilion by the lake. They were all sitting on benches. The young man stood and replied, "My name is Lin Jing. In the future, there will be a bright scene in the 12 universes." Lin Yu nodded. This was the name that everyone had given to Lin Jing, representing their expectations for Lin Jing and the 12 universes. It's been hard on you all these years. Lin Yu looked at the Jade Pure Goddess. The Jade Pure Goddess was still peerless. Her black hair was tied into a cloud bun like a waterfall, making her look more mature. You should take care of me more, the Jade Pure Goddess said. Qin Yi blushed and waved her hand. Although little Lin was a little naughty when he was young, now that he has grown up, he has made me worry a lot. Speaking of this, Lin Jianyu, who was hiding at the side, immediately prepared to leave. Because when they were young, it was Lin Jianyu who brought Lin Jing to do many things that angered the heavens. For example, they went to other universes and stole the mutant fruits that the Archaeosaurs had carefully cultivated. They even ate the roots. The Archaeosaurs were so angry that they went crazy. But with Lin Jianyu around, he couldn't beat him, so he could only swallow his anger. He even fiercely said that when Lin Yu returned, he would definitely report him. Lin Jianyu, you're here. Let's sit together for a while. Lin Yu smiled. At this moment, Lin Jianyu was helpless. With Lin Yu's current realm, he had already sensed Lin Jianyu's aura. When Lin Jianyu was about to slip away, he slowly spoke. Lin Jianyu came to the courtyard slowly and said, I don't mean anything else. I just miss Big Brother. Lin Jianyu was no longer as pure and flawless as before he was born. On the contrary, he was very black-bellied. In other universes, he had left a lot of bad names and done many things that angered countless people and gods. At this moment, he looked at Lin Yu and felt a little guilty. However, Lin Yu didn't blame him for anything. He had asked him to come here to teach him the rune technique. I have a skill here that will be extremely beneficial to you. Once you get it, you must practice it well. As Lin Yu spoke, his finger glowed with light as a law directly entered Lin Jianyu's sea of consciousness. The rune technique was inextricably linked to ancient god Lin Jianyu's bloodline and was extremely compatible. The most important reason why Lin Yu could reach this level was because of the 3 moves of the ancient god. Otherwise, he might have to stay in that world for a long time before he could completely master this technique. There seems to be some similarities between this art and the one I've grasped. Lin Jianyu was astonished. He had inherited a part of the ancient god's memory. At this moment, he was feeling the technique that Lin Yu had imparted to him, and his heart was filled with shock. The place where I'm at doesn't seem to be from the 12 universes or the 10 great holy lands. Perhaps there's a connection, Lin Jianyu said slowly. However, in the 12 universes, he already had the feeling of home, with a sense of belonging. Therefore, he didn't continue to learn about it. There was another important reason why Lin Yu imparted the technique. At this moment, Lin Jianyu already had the battle strength of the original God realm. He was one of the few existences in the entire universe. The Black Calamity was approaching. Lin Yu might not have the time to care about other things. Only when they were strong could they protect themselves. Goddess Yu Qing also saw through Lin Yu's thoughts. Is time tight now? Goddess Yu Qing asked. Lin Yu nodded. He didn't hide this and said, this is also the main reason why I returned to the universe, to find a way to break through. Lin Jianyu and the others' faces were solemn. The reason why the universe could develop like this was because Lin Yu was fighting at the front and guarding this place. After hearing Lin Yu's words, everyone's heart was heavy. Moreover, with their current cultivation, they couldn't be of much help. Father, don't worry. I can protect the 12 universes. You can go and fight without worry. At this time, Lin Jing's eyes were filled with incomparable confidence, with a burst of light. He was indeed a rare genius in the world. In less than 10,000 years, he had almost reached the ancestor realm. This kind of breakthrough speed was enough to make the geniuses in ancient history shrink back. He had perfectly inherited Lin Yu's temperament and talent. At this time, it had gradually begun to show. Lin Yu nodded with relief. Don't worry. The Black Calamity is not hopeless. Lin Yu said, Brother, are you preparing to break through? Lin Jianyu said. He inherited the memory of the ancient god. Naturally, he had a deep understanding of the realms in the world. At this time, he couldn't see through Lin Yu's cultivation. He could only vaguely feel the supreme aura. Even the great Tao of heaven and earth couldn't restrict it, surpass it. That's right. You want to break through to the utmost realm, which is the cutting path. Lin Yu said, but brother, you already have that aura. Lin Jianyu was puzzled. My battle body has only reached that realm and has the combat strength of that realm. But against the Black Calamity, it's far from enough. Lin Yu explained. He didn't hide this. When the Black Calamity finally began, they would all understand. Now that they knew, it would be beneficial for them, and they would be prepared. After hearing Lin Yu's words, everyone was shocked. But soon they calmed down. After all, Lin Yu had gone to the origin ground. With his talent and temperament, it was natural for him to have such achievements. After all, they had been by Lin Yu's side for such a long time. This was not the only time they were shocked. Lin Yu then looked at Lin Jing. He took out the chalcedony that he had obtained from the stone spirit embryo. This could baptize a person's bones and bones. It could baptize a person from a source. Lin Yu had always prepared this chalcedony for Lin Jing. As Lin Yu took out the chalcedony, that aura filled the entire city of divine kings. All kinds of strange phenomena appeared one after another. It was as if the gods and demons of the heavens were descending continuously. Everyone in the city of divine kings was shocked beyond words. This aura had even shrouded the entire heaven region. Just that wisp of aura was enough to baptize some of the younger cultivators. It was enough to show how shocking this legendary item was. Looking at the chalcedony that appeared in Lin Yu's hand, the eyes of Goddess Yu Qing and the others couldn't help but change. Lin Yu had obtained a lot of destinies in the origin ground, but the preciousness of this item was something that they could clearly sense. Lin Jianyu's eyes were filled with golden light. He couldn't help but drool. For a moment, he had the thought of playing dirty, but he suppressed it forcefully. What is this? Lin Jianyu asked. His gaze never left the chalcedony. It was obtained from a secret place in the origin ground. It can baptize a person's source and talent. Lin Yu looked at Lin Jianyu and explained, take a portion. Lin Yu couldn't help but laugh when he saw Lin Jianyu's drool almost covering the ground. This chalcedony could be divided into 10 portions. With Lin Jing's current realm, he might not be able to refine so much. Lin Jianyu had been in his infancy. It should be of great use to him now. Really, Lin Jianyu was surprised. Lin Yu took out a portion and handed it to Lin Jianyu. All right, I'll go into seclusion immediately. He took the chalcedony and disappeared on the spot. He quickly went into seclusion. I've never seen Lin Jianyu like to cultivate so much. Qin Yi smiled. Chapter 1385. Take the remaining chalcedony. I'll protect you personally. Lin Yu said to Lin Jing. Lin Yu had a natural aura of authority. Lin Jing nodded seriously. He also knew what the chalcedony represented. It was definitely an extraordinary divine item. If Lin Yu got his hands on it now, the benefits would definitely be huge. Goddess Yu Qing and Qin Yi both warned Lin Jing that he must refine the chalcedony properly. Lin Yu had left for 10,000 years and did not witness Lin Jing's growth with his own eyes. He felt guilty, and after this, he would probably have to leave again. He could not stay in the 12 universes for a long time. Lin Yu could not help but sigh. He came to the space-time secret ground that he had built before he left. With his current cultivation, he repaired it according to the Tao laws in the space-time hall. The space-time secret ground now was even more terrifying than before. For cultivators below the ancestor realm, it could slow down time by 100 times. Lin Yu stood outside the space-time secret ground. Lin Jing, on the other hand, did not hesitate at all and directly entered. He felt that the effect of this place was several times stronger than before, and his emotions changed. But soon he calmed down. His state of mind was much more determined than ordinary people. Although he was naughty when he was young, he never cried in the face of cultivation. Even when the Mahavajrana Buddha personally found a divine item to baptize him and suffered great pain, he did not cry out. Lin Yu watched as Lin Jing entered. He used the power of the God King's order to strengthen the secret ground. The effect was even more powerful now. As the phenomenon appeared, Lin Jing's bloodline roared and his consciousness turned into a physical form. He was undergoing a transformation. In the blink of an eye, more than 10 days had passed. More than 10 days in the outside world were a few years in the secret ground. At this moment, the phenomenon inside gradually calmed down. Lin Yu nodded in satisfaction. He thought that there might be some accidents. After all, the effects of the chalcedony were remarkable, and it was a divine item. But if one wanted to refine it, they would have to endure endless pain. Lin Jing walked out of the secret ground. Now that he had completely broken through to the ancestor realm, his body exuded a powerful aura. His expression was calm. He arrived in front of Lin Yu and bowed. "Many thanks, Father." Lin Yu nodded. Now, the universe tournament was approaching. Lin Yu could already sense the spatial fluctuations in the outside world. Most likely, the great solar Buddha Lord and the others had arrived. The two of them walked out of the secret ground and arrived at the deity king palace. The Archaeosaurus stepped on a cloud and descended into the hall. "Ha ha! This time, Lin Jing won't be able to participate in the competition. Let's see who can restrict my second universe." Archaeosaurus laughed. As time passed, his personality remained the same. In your second universe, the ranking is not based on the serial number of the universe. The Heavenly Phoenix also appeared. The two of them were still at loggerheads, but the Archaeosaurus' cultivation was still weaker than the Heavenly Phoenix's. Even though the two of them were currently at the half-step progenitor realm, however, it was obvious that the Heavenly Phoenix's realm was more condensed. "Greetings, godly King Lin." The Heavenly Phoenix did not continue to argue with the Archaeosaurus. After seeing Lin Yu, she bowed and paid her respects. "Senior Heavenly Phoenix, there's no need to be like this," Lin Yu said. The Heavenly Phoenix's seniority was the same as the old godly king. She was once entrusted by the old godly king, so she was suppressed by the six-winged godly king for many years. They were all heroes of the 12 universes. Lin Yu did not treat her as an outsider. Not long after, everyone gathered in the deity king palace of the 12 universes. Unsurprisingly, the 5th universe also came. However, the leader this time was not Su Yishui, but the saintess of the 5th universe, Zhang Luo, whom Lin Yu had met before. They had all received the news that Lin Yu had returned. Therefore, many powerhouses came to congratulate this time's tournament. The grand scene of the tournament was unprecedentedly grand. Su Yishui was at the side, looking at Lin Yu with a smile. Time did not leave a trace on her body, and she was still as graceful as water. Su Yishui sneered and said, "Godly King Lin, long time no see." Lin Yu also had a smile on his face. She came to Lin Yu's side. "The new godly king of the 5th universe, Zhang Luo, greets godly King Lin." Zhang Luo bowed respectfully. She was still wearing white clothes and covering her face. "Greetings, young godly king." She was very polite and greeted them one by one. However, when it came to Lin Jing, her tone was obviously paused. Lin Yu naturally saw some clues. Su Yishui sighed and said, "It seems that my 5th universe will completely fall in the 12 universes." Speaking of Zhang Luo and Lin Jing, it was necessary to start from the tournament 5,000 years ago. Lin Jing's talent was terrifying. He overcame all the difficulties and finally met Zhang Luo. However, in the end, Zhang Luo was still defeated by Lin Jing. That was the first time they met. Zhang Luo did not have any grudges because of Lin Jing's age. The relationship between the two was very subtle. The Jade Pure Divine Maiden and the others knew. After that battle, Lin Jing often came to the 5th universe to discuss the Tao and ask for advice, but they did not know what to say. However, Lin Jing's current realm had already reached the ancestor realm and could not participate in the tournament. At this time, he was just watching the tournament. Qin Wenyan arranged accommodation for the guests of the 5th universe. At this time, the great sun boundless Buddha also arrived. He still had an indifferent aura. At this time, after seeing Lin Yu, he smiled and said, "You're back." "I'm back." Lin Yu nodded with a smile. The great sun boundless Buddha had helped Lin Yu too much before and was like a real elder. Even though Lin Yu had witnessed a higher world at this time, and his strength had reached the peak, the two still treated each other as elders. Lin Xiao, Lin Yuan, and the others arrived one after another. Now, almost all of Lin Yu's old friends in the universe had arrived. There is still half a month's time before the tournament. You all should prepare well, Lin Yu said with a smile. He also wanted to see what level the strength of the younger generation had reached in the current universe. Everyone had a small gathering. The juniors from the other universes all went to their respective residences after meeting Lin Yu. Their eyes were filled with excitement. In Lin Yu's tournament, the top few people were now in the upper echelons of the universe. They told them that if Lin Yu was here, he might get an opportunity to preach the Tao. They all knew that the divine king of the 12 universes, which was the current Lin Yu, had terrifying strength. 10,000 years ago, he could easily kill original God realm cultivators. Now, it was unknown what realm he had reached. To be able to get the teachings of such a powerhouse, the benefits were undoubtedly huge. Those who had participated in the previous tournaments and now became the upper echelons of the universe had eyes full of jealousy. They were jealous of the younger generation. In the previous tournaments, they were all in the top 10 and obtained supreme fortune. But in comparison, Lin Yu's teachings were incomparable to any divine item. Juniors, this time, no matter what, you have to do your best to get a ranking. This is a chance to soar into the sky. Someone sternly warned his disciples. All the disciples were excited. They began to make the best preparations in their residences. Everyone had a small gathering in the Divine King Palace. Because of the tournament, they didn't start the gathering in advance. At this time, they were all catching up. They hadn't met for a long time. At this time, Lin Yu looked at Lin Xiao. There was still a strange aura on his body, but it was very faint. It seemed that he had almost refined the strange substance in his body. The two looked at each other and nodded. Lin Xiao's talent was undoubtedly terrifying. He had now reached the middle stage of the ancestor realm. Now he could be considered the strongest person besides Lin Zhanyu and the great sun boundless Buddha. Chapter 1386. Everyone was in the main hall. Su Yishui stood beside Lin Yu with the attitude of the previous divine king in front of everyone. Lin Jing had already taken Jiang Luo to visit the divine king palace. Lin Yu, the jade pure divine maiden, and the others didn't stop them. Jiang Luo had a supreme physique, and his future was boundless. Lin Jing's cultivation and talent were number one among the younger generation. If they could be together, it would be a good story. Su Yishui, on the other hand, was unhappy and said to Lin Yu, "You father and son really have a good plan." Her eyes were filled with reproach. Lin Yu just smiled and didn't comment. "The fifth universe is full of beauties," the jade pure divine maiden said at this time. She liked Jiang Luo very much. "Sister Yishui, don't worry. Jiang Luo will go in the end anyway," Qin Yi said with a smile. Time didn't leave the slightest trace on the faces of the three women. They were teasing each other. "You want to leave my disciple in the 12 universes? Then who will inherit my mantle? I'm tired of being the divine king," Su Yishui said. Qin Yi nodded with a smile and said, "Why don't Sister Yishui take the 12 universes for a while after this time, and then go back?" Su Yishui spread her hands and said, "I want to, but now Master is about to wake up and send a message to enter the realm sea. The fifth universe has many things to deal with now." She looked helpless. At the same time, she was also worried. Although after 10,000 years of sleep, Luo had gradually broken through to the Tao realm. How terrifying was the realm sea? "After you come back, will you still leave?" Su Yishui looked at Lin Yu and asked. However, even if Lin Yu didn't say it, she knew that Lin Yu wouldn't stay in the 12 universes for long. At this time, the final day of the Black Calamity had arrived. All the creatures in the universe vaguely sensed it in their hearts. Especially the perception of the powerhouses, it was especially intense. Su Yishui also heard the news from her master. She had always been worried, and now she was concerned about Lin Yu. "After this grand competition, I will leave. However, I will stay in the universe for some time," Lin Yu replied. This was something that could not be helped. He needed to increase his strength as soon as possible so that he could protect the 12 universes during the Black Calamity. After witnessing the power of the 10 great sovereigns, Lin Yu knew that it was far from enough for him to merely possess supreme combat power. He had to break through to the true supreme realm as soon as possible. Otherwise, if the sovereign stage were to recover, there would be nothing in the land of origin that could resist it. Senior Luo, entering the realm C, is it to head to the land of origin? Lin Yu inquired. This was something he cared about. Because Luo was the descendant of Universe 5's utmost being back then. The reason why she went to the land of origin at this time was probably for the sake of the backup plan left behind by the utmost being back then. It should be. Sui Shui was also not sure, because Luo didn't tell her these things in detail. However, the words final destination were mentioned in the short sentences. Lin Yu nodded. If that was the case, he could basically confirm it. Luo was heading to the land of origin for the backup plan left behind by the utmost being back then. Now that the utmost being hadn't appeared, among all the living beings in the land of origin, only the first emperor was known to possess the utmost being realm. If the Black Calamity were to arrive in advance, the first emperor would definitely be helpless by then. It was almost impossible for one person to fight against the 10 great sovereigns. Perhaps even Lin Yu's first ancestor, Lin Xian, didn't possess such strength. The few of them only mentioned a few simple words. Right now, the Dark Priest and the others were sighing constantly. Their current strength was too weak compared to the entire Black Calamity. Even if they were to reach the land of origin, they would only be reduced to cannon fodder. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. In this grand competition, it was obvious that the strength of the juniors had increased by a few levels. They all carried the belief of being invincible. Among them, there were a few that even Lin Yu couldn't help but take a few more glances. At this moment, the Archaeosaurus stood beside Lin Yu and asked, "Do you know why they're working so hard?" He told Lin Yu, "Actually, it's to get the chance to impart the Tao to you." Lin Yu smiled and said, "It's not that I can't. Since I'm here, as the God King, I naturally have to take out something." All of them had their eyes on the chance to impart the Tao to Lin Yu. Faced with the hope of the juniors, Lin Yu naturally wouldn't reject it. "You're speaking as if you can get this chance in the universe you're from," the Heavenly Phoenix said in disdain. "Have you forgotten how badly you've lost in the past few grand competitions? You've forgotten the pain after the scars have healed." The Archaeosaurus didn't back down and said, "I think that little kid under you is just so-so." As the two of them bickered, they were about to come to blows again. "Since you're already in this position, mind your image." The Dark Priest and the others held back the Archaeosaurus and the Heavenly Phoenix and advised them. This was to give the two of them a way out. Both of them snorted coldly and ignored each other. Instead, they carefully watched the battle. The grand competition lasted for half a month. Among the victors this time, there were people that Lin Yu knew. The young man who had received Lin Yu's imparting the Tao to the entire 12 universes back, then was now at the peak of the battle of the Saint Realm. His perseverance was truly astonishing. In the end, he fought with the young man from the third universe until both sides were injured. The grand competition was coming to an end. Under everyone's envious gazes, the victors came in front of Lin Yu. They naturally received the imparting of the Tao. However, Lin Yu didn't tell them his Tao word for word. Instead, he explained the great Tao of heaven and earth, leaving them enough space. They benefited a lot. In the process of receiving the imparting of the Tao, they directly broke through. There was a deep look in his eyes. They also received the opportunity to cultivate in the secret place of time and space for 100 years. This was also a great opportunity. The secret place of time and space was not open to the public. Only those who had made great contributions to the universe were qualified to enter it. However, this time, after Lin Yu returned, he used the power of the God King's order to give the juniors who came to participate in the grand competition the opportunity to enter the secret place of time and space to cultivate. This caused everyone to be excited. In the secret place of time and space, Not only could it slow down the flow of time, but it also contained the insights of generations of powerhouses in the universe, as well as many opportunities. Even if they obtained one thing, it was enough to benefit them for the rest of their lives. After the grand competition ended, everyone came to the main hall. This was a grand event. Almost all the higher-ups in the universe were present. The entire square was filled with tables. However, the highest level, which was Lin Yu's relatives and friends, were in the God King's palace. This time, Lin Yu returned and brought many divine objects, which were all given to everyone. At the same time, he also left the rune technique he had comprehended in the 12 universes, leaving it for the young people who had the opportunity to comprehend it. Every item that Lin Yu took out was a shocking divine object that couldn't be seen in the universe at all. Chapter 1387. Everyone could not help but take a good look at him. Their eyes were filled with astonishment for quite a while. However, the great Solar Buddha and the others knew that the items that Lin Yu had obtained were rare even in the origin ground. He might have even risked his life for them. The dishes were served. Everyone allowed Lin Yu to speak first. This time around, we'll just take it as a reminiscence and not ask about anything else. Even though I won't be staying in the 12 universes for long, I'm still happy to have you guys around. Lin Yu said calmly. Everyone let go of the worries in their hearts. That's right. We're just drinking right now and not asking about anything else. Even if the world were to be destroyed tomorrow, it would have nothing to do with us now. The Archaeosaurs burst out laughing. Now that they were in charge of a universe, they naturally knew a little about the secrets of the Black Calamity from the lost ancient books. And right now, there was a strange premonition in their hearts. It was as though the world was about to change in the near future. This was especially the case for the great Solar Buddha. He could already see a corner of the future and was filled with despair and tragedy. However, they did not care about that right now. Today, Lin Yu had returned after a separation of 10,000 years, and they were all filled with joy. They knew that this might be the last time they would be drinking. By the time the Black Calamity arrived, who knew how many people would fall and disappear from the face of the world entirely? Don't worry. As long as I, Lin Yu, am around, I won't watch as the 12 universes are destroyed. This was Lin Yu's conviction. With that said, everyone raised the wine cups in their hands and downed it in a single gulp. The grand occasion lasted all the way till the next morning. Right now, the universe was relatively peaceful, welcoming a golden age that had not been seen for millions of years. The great Solar Buddha and the others were not in a hurry to return to the universe. Right now, as long as it wasn't the powerful beings of the origin ground that returned, no one could threaten the great Solar Buddha and the others. And right now, Lin Yu had used the power of faith to create a clone of his that possessed 50% of the strength of his main body. As long as it wasn't an utmost being that came, no living being in the entire world could threaten the masses of the 12 universes. The great Solar Buddha and the others stayed in the 12 universes for a couple of years before leaving one after another. God King Lin, take care of yourself. Before the darkness priest left, he reminded Lin Yu. His lips curled into a smile. He turned around and left. Lin Yu looked in the direction where the dark priest had left. Then he thought of the illusory figures of the Mahavajrana Buddha and the dark heavenly priest that he saw in the stone city. Furthermore, the Vairocana Buddha's eyes had been hollowed out and the dark heavenly priest's limbs had been chopped off. Lin Yu didn't know if this was a reflection of his own heart, or if it was something that was about to happen in the future, or in the long river of time. Both of them could be considered as elders. In the process of fighting against the six-winged divine king, he had given him too much help, so they had deep feelings for each other. He would not allow that to happen. After everyone had left, Lin Yu came to the lakeside to say his final goodbyes. This time, he had taken the time to come to the 12 universes to see if his old friend were doing well. However, Zhang Luo stayed by Lin Jing's side and did not leave. At this moment, they were all on Lin Yu's side. However, Lin Yu didn't like to give warnings or anything. He was a man of few words. Facing Lin Jing, He didn't say much. In the eyes of the jade pure goddess and the others, there was a sadness of parting. They knew that Lin Yu would only stay for a short 3 years before he was going to leave again. Now that the black calamity was imminent, they all knew the severity of the matter, so they didn't ask Lin Yu to stay. Lin Yu condensed 2 seeds of the great Tao with the Tao law in his inner world, and gave them to Lin Jing and Jiang Luo respectively. They contained the power of the great Tao. These were the 2 seeds that Lin Yu could only condense in his inner world. He had high expectations for Lin Jing, but he had never shown it. After saying his final goodbyes, Lin Yu got up and prepared to go to the 10 great sacred grounds to ask Bai Xiaoli and the others about the origin of the clay jar and whether it could be restored completely. "Father, the next time you come back, I want you to personally preside over our wedding." Lin Jing was also sad, although he and Lin Yu had only been together for a few years. But he could clearly feel Lin Yu's feelings for him, even if he didn't give him any guidance. But Lin Yu had left the best for him. "Okay." Lin Yu nodded. Then, his figure slowly disappeared from where he stood. He had left a mark in the 10-direction world when he used not heaven. Now that his cultivation level had increased, he could cross a great world in the blink of an eye. In the familiar 10-direction world sacred ground, Lin Yu came to the door. He sensed that Bai Xiaoli had recovered well, and now had supreme strength. But compared to the 10 great monster kings, she was still a distance away from full recovery. But now, Bai Xiaoli had awakened. He had sensed it when Lin Yu crossed the great world. Bai Yu and the others were already waiting at the door. At this time, they couldn't see through Lin Yu's aura. Even in the 10 great sacred grounds, except for the monster kings, no one could stop him. He entered the main hall. Bai Xiaoli had already turned into her human form, but she still had 9 foxtails, and there seemed to be countless divine kingdoms floating on them. Her graceful figure, slender and straight legs, and languid eyes were filled with endless charm. All the men in the world would lose their souls after seeing Bai Xiaoli. "You've recovered well," Lin Yu said calmly. Now, he naturally wouldn't be charmed by Bai Xiaoli, and his state of mind was very calm. "I didn't expect you to reach such a state in just 10,000 years. You're almost on par with me." When Bai Xiaoli saw Lin Yu, her limpid eyes revealed a trace of surprise. Just now, she wasn't sure if Lin Yu had come to the 10-direction world. But now, looking at the aura emitted from Lin Yu's body, he was really shocked. Even Bai Xiaoli couldn't help but say the word monster. "I'm just borrowing the fortune of the origin ground," Lin Yu said. "No matter how much fortune you have, if you don't have the talent and temperament, it's hard to break through the great Tao." Bai Xiaoli said, "Why are you looking for me?" This was the question Bai Xiaoli was concerned about. Now that Lin Yu had returned from the origin ground, he must know a lot of secrets of the ancient war. She looked at Lin Yu with curiosity in her eyes. "I want to know the origin of the clay jar." Lin Yu said. He and Bai Xiaoli were very close, and by now, Bai Xiaoli wouldn't hide anything from him. "Seems like you've heard it from them," Bai Xiaoli said. She didn't mention the clay jar to Lin Yu before, so she must have her concerns. However, after seeing Lin Yu's current strength, she didn't hide it anymore. After a sigh, Bai Xiaoli said, "This artifact is indeed brought out by us, the 10 great monster kings, from the strange place in the depths of the world sea. It involves the one who created the 12 universes and the 10 great saint lands, the creator god." Bai Xiaoli said, "Back then, there were 2 supreme experts under him. After he passed away, they started the Black Calamity." Chapter 1388. This was the first time Bai Xiaoli had mentioned the origins of the Black Calamity. Lin Yu was slightly taken aback. He had not expected the Black Calamity to be related to the creator god. Since he was the one who created the 12 universes and the 10 sacred grounds, and even the cultivation techniques were created by him, why would he choose to trigger the Black Calamity in the end? Or was there more to it than meets the eye? With regard to this, Lin Yu had some guesses in his heart. If the creator god of the past was the one who created the world, why would he trigger the Black Calamity in the future? Lin Yu voiced out his doubts. Bai Xiaoli shook her head and said, I have no idea about this as well. She did not continue speaking. There were too many secrets involved in this. However, there was one thing that he could be sure of, and that was that the Creator God had fallen a long time ago. The Black Calamity was triggered by the two powerful beings under him back then. In other words, those two powerful beings are the ancestors of a strange race. Lin Yu was getting more and more surprised. The step of the Creator God was definitely the end of the world, and no one could reach it. Lin Yu could not imagine how strong those who were qualified to be by his side back then were. You could say that. However, the ancestor of the strange race was one of them. Bai Xiaoli continued. Back then, the 10 demon kings were fighting against another person. As for the utmost beings, they were fighting against the living beings that were born after the mutation of the ancestor of the strange race. Bai Xiaoli said, right now, in the World Sea, there seems to be a problem with the other one. The predecessor of the first universe is fighting against him. Lin Yu shared the things that he had learned in the origin ground. Is that so? Bai Xiaoli's brows were furrowed. However, she thought about it again. Since such a long time had passed, there might have been a mutation there. Lin Yu nodded his head. Right now, he needed to understand the true reason behind the Black Calamity. Now that he heard Bai Xiaoli's description, he realized that the Black Calamity was not limited to just one place since ancient times. Can the pottery jar suppress the creepy clan? Lin Yu asked the question that he wanted to know. This was because Lin Yu already knew that the clay jar had a natural restraining effect on the strange creatures. Yes. However, if you want to truly destroy the mysterious race, just the clay pot alone won't be enough. What's truly effective is the thing within the clay pot. Bai Xiaoli revealed a shocking truth. It turned out that the earthen jar was just a carrier for carrying something, and the thing that was really useful was the thing inside the earthen jar. Lin Yu fell in a deep thought. At this moment, Bai Xiaoli spoke again. However, the things inside were lost in the realm sea during the great battle. That battle had been too tragic. Otherwise, the 10 great Fey Kings would not have been sealed in the end. Lin Yu's brows furrowed slightly. The realm sea was so vast. If the thing in the clay pot was really lost in the realm sea, the difficulty of finding it would be as difficult as ascending to the heavens. Part of the fragments of the clay pot were also lost in the realm sea after it was broken in the great battle. Bai Xiaoli said what Lin Yu was concerned about. It turned out that part of the fragments of the clay pot no longer existed in the universe. This was also the reason why Lin Yu had not been able to find it. If that was the case, the clay pot might never be repaired. The thing that was hidden in it would also be impossible to find. However, there's no need to worry. Before we were sealed, we left a mark unique to the Fey Kings on the broken clay pot. After we recover to our peak, we will naturally be able to find it. Bai Xiaoli said. However, I don't know if that living being will use some method to find it after such a long time. Bai Xiaoli said. That living being in the past was almost destroyed by the 10 great Fey Kings. Both sides had paid a heavy price for it. Otherwise, in the ancient history, after the 10 great Fey Kings were sealed, the entire 10 great sacred grounds and the universe would have been destroyed. However, the current 10 great sacred grounds were not much different from being destroyed. They were once prosperous and prosperous, but now they were reduced to ruins. Back then, the 10 great sacred grounds were not any weaker than the universe. There were more than billions of living beings within. It was because the 10 great Fey Kings were sealed that they were almost destroyed in the great battle. Among them were the descendants and bloodline of Bai Xiaoli. This was a blood feud. At the mention of this, Bai Xiaoli's eyes were filled with killing intent. Even now, that living being should not have fully recovered. Bai Xiaoli said, otherwise, given the strength of the first universe, it would have been destroyed long ago. Even if the first universe was inextricably linked to that living being, it would be impossible for it to exist. It would be completely wiped out. After Lin Yu understood this, he increasingly felt that the future would be rather tragic, even if the reincarnators on Earth were already in the midst of recovery. But in terms of the powerful beings, the utmost beings had already passed away. Even if there were only 9 of the 10 great thrones left, they were still not easy to deal with. By then, the 10 great Fey Kings would definitely have to face that living being here. They would definitely not be able to free their hands. In other words, out of all the living beings in the universe right now, the founding emperor was the only one with top fighting strength. Right now, Lin Yu had to fuse with his 3 lives Dao fruit completely. Perhaps he might be able to surpass the 10 great thrones. But right now, he did not have that much time. Lin Yu did not know if his 3 lives Dao fruit possessed the power to do so. Right now, Lin Yu still had not grasped the complete great Dao. This was also the reason why, even though his cultivation base and consciousness had both reached a half-step utmost being state, he was still having a hard time breaking through. In the battle with the thrones, he had borrowed the power of his Dao fruit and the methods left behind by his ancestors. He had never used the power of his own Dao laws. If one were to talk about it, his own Dao laws were to control time and space. However, this path had already been taken by Lin Xian and his future Dao fruit. It was difficult for 2 utmost beings to appear on a single path. This was a rule that had existed since the ancient times. Furthermore, if one were to step onto a great Dao that had already been refined, it would be hard for them to reach the end. After understanding many anecdotes, Lin Yu and Bai Xiaoli began discussing the Dao. The 10 great demon kings did not need to grasp a single great Dao to reach the peak. However, as a human, Lin Yu cannot do so. This was a rule that had been set since the ancient times. This also meant that if Lin Yu wanted to truly reach the utmost being state, he would have to comprehend a great Dao of his own. Only then would he be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with the 10 great demon kings. Lin Yu had already informed Bai Xiaoli about the 3 lives Dao fruit that he possessed now. Now that you've already reached this state, if you can't comprehend your own great Dao, there's only one way. Bai Xiaoli sighed. Lin Yu's Dao path was supposed to have a boundless future ahead of him. In Bai Xiaoli's evaluation, he had surpassed everyone else since the ancient times. But right now, Lin Yu's success and failure were both due to his Dao fruit. Due to the shackles of the 3 lives Dao fruit, it was hard for him to comprehend his own great Dao. What's the way? Lin Yu asked. Make use of some powerful means to refine your 3 lives Dao fruit into your body in advance. Bai Xiaoli replied. If he were to do that, it would mean that Lin Yu's future path to the utmost being state would be completely severed. There would be no possibility for him to advance any further. This was the best solution that he could come up with. Bai Xiaoli continued. If you were to do that, you might be stuck at the 8th level of the Dao severing realm, which is the strength of sovereign. However, that alone was definitely not enough to fight against the mysterious race. Chapter 1389. At this moment, Lin Yu recalled what the founding emperor had said about the backup plans left behind by the utmost beings. Perhaps he could make use of the backup plans left behind by the utmost beings to seek a way to break through. Speaking of which, it's true that the utmost beings of the past had encountered a huge problem after entering the ancestral grounds. When they were about to fall, they told us, the 10 great demon kings, that they had left something behind in the universe. Bai Xiaoli said. However, she did not harbor much hope for this. The backup plans left behind by the utmost beings were probably just to create another powerful being with the strength of a Dao severing 8th heaven. To reach the level of Lin Xian might be difficult. This was Lin Yu's biggest problem right now. Back then, the utmost being of the 8th universe had a dream. He predicted that in this world, there might be a person who could suppress the black calamity and end all eternity. Bai Xiaoli looked at Lin Yu. Back then, the utmost being of the 8th universe had already cultivated the Dao of dreams to an extreme state. He could foresee the past, present, and future. This was a prophecy that even the 10 great demon kings believed in deeply. Right now, Bai Xiaoli was looking at Lin Yu. Perhaps there was a glimmer of hope in her heart. Therefore, she did not recommend Lin Yu to do so, to accept the backup plans left behind by the utmost beings, or perhaps to cultivate his own Dao fruit in advance. The most important thing right now was to figure out his own Tao. Figuring out a Tao was easier said than done. Even the strongest, utmost being of the past had to spend a long time to do so. In this short period of time, Lin Yu was basically just talking about empty talk. Lin Yu was deep in thoughts as well. This matter can't be rushed. Why don't I spend some time to figure it out and explore? Who knows, I might be able to come up with my own insights. Bai Xiaoli did not know much about the cultivation of Tao. However, she knew that if she were to be told directly what Tao to figure out, it would only be shackles and shackles to a person and would not achieve any results at all. This was something that Lin Yu understood deeply as well. Lin Yu had already followed Bai Xiaoli to his secret ground. However, he did not stay for long. Right now, he had to think about where his Tao lay. First, he explored the 10 great saint grounds. Then, he came to the place where he had first fought for the item that could help Bai Xiaoli break free. There were no Tao laws here. Furthermore, Lin Yu had used the power of his only inner realm to completely seal the power of his Tao fruit. He was like an ordinary person at the moment. Only his constitution was still extremely strong. He took one step at a time, measuring the land. Now, without the Tao laws of heaven and earth and the Tao influence of his own Tao fruit, the Tao laws of heaven and earth had disappeared. He was now a piece of white paper without any ink on it. It could allow him to wield the ink, or to inscribe a magnificent picture of mountains and rivers, or to draw a picture of birds and flowers. However, Lin Yu still had no clue. He walked in a heaven burial ground, measuring his own journey and the things that had happened to him. In the blink of an eye, 5,000 years had passed. Lin Yu walked on the path of heaven burial, as if he had experienced a lifetime. Now he was like an old man past his prime. His hair was white, his figure was stooped, and his body emitted an aura of decay. This was a sign of impending Tao assimilation. Lin Yu really felt like he had reached the end of his life. At this moment, he no longer had any essence, qi, and spirit. Even his spirit consciousness had dimmed. However, there was no one beside him. Bai Xiaoli looked at the soul lamp in front of her. It was swaying constantly and was almost extinguished. Am I still going to fail? Bai Xiaoli sighed. She was conflicted about whether she should forcefully intervene and bring Lin Yu back. However, if that was the case, it would mean that Lin Yu's path was completely cut off. There was no possibility of rebuilding it. Now, Lin Yu had fallen into Tao assimilation. He sat on the ground with his legs crossed. His body was stooped, and his face was full of weathered scars. Am I really going to die? Lin Yu sighed in his heart. He had already forgotten who he was and why he had come here. It was as if everything in this life had been forgotten from his heart. The fragments of his memories gradually drifted away in his mind. At this moment, Bai Xiaoli was in the 10-direction world. She frowned and said, "It seems like I've failed. I have to take action. If I'm late, even if I save him, it will be in vain." With that, Bai Xiaoli's figure disappeared on the spot. However, just as she was about to head to where Lin Yu was, suddenly, the soul lamp in Bai Xiaoli's hand blazed brightly. What's that aura? Even Bai Xiaoli, who was extremely far away, could sense this aura. It was as if a terrifying pressure had appeared between heaven and earth. Even the current Bai Xiaoli could not withstand it. At this moment, Lin Yu was in the depths of the heaven burial ground. Below him was a deep abyss. It was like a demonic eye that had appeared on the ground. It could swallow everything. This was the origin of the heaven burial ground. According to legend, the heavenly Tao of the past was buried here. However, for Lin Yu, none of this affected him. Nothing in the world could affect his state of mind. Now, he was in a state of oblivion. Memories appeared in his mind once again. Looking back on my life, I've always had a Tao around me. Lin Yu's eyes suddenly opened. The 10 great sacred grounds were all affected. Behind him, the illusory image of the stone city appeared. An incomparably terrifying aura was emitted from Lin Yu's body. This was the stone city that he had created. It seemed that because he was comprehending his own Tao, the stone city in the realm sea sensed something and reflected itself behind Lin Yu. The 10 great monster kings, who were in a deep sleep, opened their eyes at the same time. Bai Xiaoli also stopped at this moment. She carefully sensed the aura in the heaven burial ground. Her face was solemn. That kid seems to have comprehended his own Tao, but it contains a great terror. The 10 great monster kings' minds were connected. At this moment, they understood from Bai Xiaoli. The changes in the heaven burial ground were caused by Lin Yu's comprehension of Tao. This aura seems to be similar to the place in the depths of the realm sea where the utmost beings once entered. Bai Xiaoli recalled. Naturally, she knew that the utmost beings used that place to create the land of reincarnation. It allowed the experts who had passed away to have the possibility of reviving. However, she did not know the exact location. This location could not be exposed. Reincarnation. I've been reincarnated for 100,000 years. From a small god king to an ordinary youth on earth, and then to Lin Yu of the primordial continent. I've always been reincarnated. Lin Yu understood. It turned out that his Tao had always been by his side. It had never disappeared or left. The Tao of reincarnation. It was the Tao that Lin Yu was most familiar with. It was even better than the space-time Tao law. He could only control the God King's token after he broke free from reincarnation. The Tao of reincarnation had been by Lin Yu's side for a longer time than the Tao of space and time. However, as Lin Yu comprehended it, the entire heaven burial ground was in silence. Since ancient times, no one had ever mastered the Tao of reincarnation. Even the utmost beings did not believe in the existence of reincarnation before witnessing the Stone City. Chapter 1390. Under the aura of the Tao of reincarnation that Lin Yu had comprehended, the heaven burial ground that had existed since ancient times was starting to crack apart inch by inch. The entire ground was turning into dust. This horrifying shockwave affected the 10 saint grounds. All the demon kings could sense the aura of Lin Yu. At this moment, they were all startled awake from their deep slumber. Bai Xiaoli was in the void as well. Looking at the crumbling heaven burial ground, her eyes were filled with astonishment. She had not expected that Lin Yu would have comprehended the Tao law of reincarnation after a few thousand years. The Tao law of reincarnation was something that had never been grasped by anyone since ancient times. In fact, even the utmost beings had once doubted if the Tao law of reincarnation truly existed. Time passed by continuously. At this moment, Lin Yu's figure had already disappeared entirely. In fact, there wasn't even a single trace of his existence left behind. It was as though the entire world could no longer carve his figure into it. After a long time, at this moment, Lin Yu seemed to have entered a mysterious state. The aura of an utmost being was being released continuously. However, the aura of his body was being weakened continuously. In the span of a few years, he seemed to have returned to his youth. Then, he slowly turned back into a child. Lin Yu's body was experiencing reincarnation continuously. This continued until 1,000 years later. His body no longer changed as he returned from his old age to his peak state. He suddenly opened his eyes. He saw a world of silence. Lin Yu's aura has disappeared. Bai Xiaoli frowned. At this moment, she could no longer sense Lin Yu's aura. It was as though Lin Yu had already passed away completely. There wasn't even a single trace of him left in this world. Has he failed? Bai Xiaoli mumbled. Initially, she was still lamenting over the fact that Lin Yu had stepped onto a Tao that no one had ever stepped onto before. But right now, it seemed as though Lin Yu had already failed. Right now, every single bit of existence was gone. He had left this world forever. In the end, it's still hard to achieve. Bai Xiaoli sighed continuously. Even though she had experienced countless years as a supreme beast monarch and had lost all her emotions, her eyes were still filled with sadness when she saw Lin Yu's aura vanishing. She had a close relationship with Lin Yu. They had experienced many things together. But now, everything was over. Something's not right. Bai Xiaoli opened her eyes. In the burial of heaven, which had already been reduced to dust, there seemed to still be an aura that contained supreme will. It was as if that place was constantly experiencing reincarnation. Bai Xiaoli didn't get close. She only watched from afar. However, it was the presence of this aura that made Bai Xiaoli aware of it. Perhaps Lin Yu hadn't died, but had entered a strange space. Even in her current state, it was difficult for her to sense it. The space became quiet as Bai Xiaoli sat cross-legged in the void with her hands placed on her knees. She knew that the process of enlightenment could easily take tens of thousands of years. Lin Yu hadn't perished. He was currently comprehending the Tao. She was here to protect him. At this moment, the ancient pot demon king had also arrived. The Tao law that Lin Yu had comprehended was too terrifying. Therefore, the ancient pot demon king needed to find out the specific situation. Bai Xiaoli, what happened? The ancient pot demon king asked. Even though the 10 beast monarchs had similar thoughts, they couldn't stand each other and had fought many times. However, now that the battle was imminent, they had all abandoned their old grudges. It's Lin Yu's aura. No, there's another aura that I left behind. The ancient pot demon king sensed that aura. At this moment, he frowned. But now, the remaining aura had completely dissipated. It was difficult for him to sense it. Did he fail? The ancient pot demon king asked. Not necessarily, Bai Xiaoli said calmly. She wasn't sure how Lin Yu was doing now. In a vast expanse, Lin Yu appeared in a dark area. There was a ray of light in the sky. Lin Yu walked on the path calmly. This place seems to be the Stone City. Am I here again? Lin Yu looked at his surroundings. However, this time around, he didn't come to the ancient stone bridge. Instead, he was in a foreign space. He guessed that the reason why he came to the Stone City was because there was a familiar aura here. This was especially the case since he could clearly sense that string of prayer beads on his Tao fruit in this life. Lin Yu strolled on the ancient land. The reincarnation aura here was extremely obvious. Even though he was cultivating the Tao of reincarnation, he still couldn't withstand the aura here. His Tao fruit in this life was slowly fusing with his body. That string of prayer beads seemed to have materialized and appeared on Lin Yu's wrist. Right now, he had already started on the path to the utmost being. The Tao fruit in this life was fusing with his body, and he had truly stepped into the utmost being state. The state he was in right now was really strange. Although he wasn't at the utmost being state, the aura that was emanating from his body was still extremely horrifying. He could definitely stand shoulder to shoulder with the utmost beings. At this moment, he was constantly transforming. It was just that Lin Yu didn't know why he would appear here. This is the true land of reincarnation. Could it be because I comprehended the great Tao of reincarnation? Lin Yu was doubtful. If that was the case, since ancient times, no one had comprehended the great Tao of reincarnation. It might be because of the Stone City. Such a Tao law didn't exist in this world. Only the Stone City existed. This was also the reason why it was difficult for those supreme beings to reincarnate. Living beings were the most wonderful existences in this world. They were born from chaos. If a living being died, it meant that your methods were heaven-defying and it was difficult to revive them. Since I'm here, I guess I've indirectly obtained recognition, Lin Yu muttered. He now thought of the reason why he could obtain recognition. It might be the reason why he had lived on Earth for a period of time in the past. Could it be that first ancestor or father had already foreseen this day? Lin Yu was doubtful. This was the only way to explain why his father had sent him to Earth and caused him to lose his memories. A few years had passed in the blink of an eye for such a powerful creature. It didn't affect him at all. Looks like it wasn't a coincidence that I came to the Stone City back then. Lin Yu now thought of it. However, he was the one who walked the path, one step at a time. He sat cross-legged on the ground. Lin Yu now wanted to use the aura of the great Tao of reincarnation here to completely comprehend and refine the Tao law of reincarnation. This was the foundation for him to truly step into the supreme realm. Only then would he have something to rely on when he cut the Tao. This was something that a living being had to experience when he stepped into the supreme realm. An unknown amount of time passed. The prayer beads on Lin Yu's wrist had become more and more solid. They had turned into substance, and the aura of reincarnation was flowing out from them. It seemed to be able to send people to the afterlife. No one could resist this power. Under the influence of Lin Yu's Tao law, The runes on the stone sword were completely melted into the sword body. At this moment, the stone sword had experienced countless eras and finally stepped into the realm of supreme weapons again. However, as a primordial divine artifact, it was very difficult for it to return to its initial grade after being refined. However, after being repaired, the mysterious power that the stone sword carried was even stronger. It was as if it could cut off a person's origin even if it was suspended in the void. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.